What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. So what I want to do here is have a discussion about Batman Rebirth. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of all this, you'll have a good idea of where the series stands and how it expects to shape up going into the future of DC Comics. So much like Green Arrow and the rest of the Rebirth releases, Batman draws on a combination of pulling the past and the present together. However, the difficulty of this concept comes in the idea that DC has never been straightforward about Bruce's past events in relation to the New 52. What I mean here is that where the rest of DC's lineup largely received clean-cut reboots, Batman's past continuity was left ambiguous with occasional references here and there, including Batman Eternal, which saw the return of Thomas Elliot, who referenced the pre-Flashpoint story Hush, while Barbara Gordon discussed her recovery after being shot during the pre-Flashpoint story Killing Joke. To this end, while this did offer the potential to maintain the canonicity of some of Batman's most iconic stories, including Nightfall, on the whole, the reader was left in a quagmire, being expected to believe that everything from Crisis on Infinite Earths to Flashpoint all happened in a 5-year window, while not actually being told whether it did. Now, where much of the confusion fell to the wayside in the face of Scott Snyder's run with the introduction of the Court of Owls and the return of the Joker during Death of the Family and Endgame as part of Snyder's multi-part epic, the fact remains that even if fans weren't beating down the doors of DC for answers, at the very least, some measure of cohesiveness was expected to be forthcoming, if for no other reason than to add depth to Bruce Wayne's life experiences. While fans looked to the idea of Rebirth as a way for DC to provide the answers they were looking for, instead, readers walked away empty-handed, being left with a multitude of unanswered questions and a bit of confusion. Written by Tom King and Scott Snyder, one of the biggest drawbacks of the issue is that we don't actually know whose hand is in the cookie jar. While the book feels almost exactly like something Snyder would write, Tom King's name is still listed as co-writer, leaving us to ask whether or not the book is an actual representation of what to expect going forward into the series. But initially opening up with Alfred in the midst of tending the garden, Wayne Manor is visited by the arrival of Duke Thomas in response to a previously extended offer. To sidetrack for a second, Duke Thomas was one of several heroes introduced as part of the We Are Robin line of comics under the banner of DCU. Written by Lee Bermeo and drawn by Rob Haynes and Kerry Randolph, while it only spanned 12 issues, the story focused on Duke Thomas along with a handful of other teenagers, all of whom adopted the mantle of Robin and operated as vigilantes after being inspired by various members of the Bat family. Receiving fairly high reviews but experiencing mediocre sales, like many of DC's titles, We Are Robin was cancelled between the announcement of DC Rebirth and the lead up to its launch at the beginning of June. However, focusing on the story, the events contained within center on a kind of tour of Bruce Wayne's life as it progresses throughout the length of a week. Meeting with Lucius Fox on a Tuesday, the conversation between the two is not of stupendous importance. Instead, it follows a standard method of Snyder's storytelling, providing a bit of mortar between the bricks of Batman's events, giving us some insight into his own personal life. To this end, with Lucius Fox recounting a conversation with Bruce's father on why Thomas Wayne became a doctor, where Lucius found it a bit foolhardy and the definition of insanity by helping the sick while knowing they would only get sick again, the rhetorical question is designed to highlight the necessity of Bruce Wayne being Batman, and that while the criminals he catches always escape, creating an endless cat-and-mouse game, the cycle exists because it needs to, if for no other reason than to keep criminals from achieving their goal and Gotham falling into disarray. Following this, the story transitions to Wednesday, with Bruce Wayne revealing to Duke that Gotham has been met with the return of Calendar Man, a being whose life changes with the seasons, meaning he dies in the winter, is reborn in the spring, and ages through the summer and fall, with the cycle repeating itself. Now, where this is really just background stuff with Snyder and King giving us something to read while we make our way through the comic, the overall theme here is that Duke continues to stay along for the ride. Bringing him to the Batcave, the purpose behind Duke's presence is revealed, with Batman providing a home for him in the wake of his parents' insanity. To sidetrack here, during the events of Batman Endgame and Joker's attack on Gotham, with the Joker intending to reenact the death of Bruce Wayne's parents by using the parents of Duke, the toxin he had used had permeated their minds, pushing them into insanity without an immediate cure. Where Bruce was able to rescue Duke and escape, Duke's parents were left behind, leaving Duke himself as an orphan. Using this as a jumping-off platform, while neither King nor Snyder offer a direct answer, the implication seems to be that Duke is being offered a position alongside Batman that is akin to the Robin mantle, but remains ambiguous. With Duke appearing receptive to the idea, this revelation is really the only standout part of the story. In truth, things essentially fall back into rank and file, with Batman coming to the realization that Calendar Man had planted spores around Gotham, which if released, will kill everyone in the city. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's no real explanation available about these spores, and it seems to be designed that way. What I mean here is that because this Rebirth issue appears to be written in the form of a week in the life of Bruce Wayne, it plays on the notion of every comic being an end of Gotham scenario, and the idea that Batman is the only one who can save the day. While the story does see Batman succeeding and destroying Calendar Man's machines, as well as depicting his rebirth in the form of shedding his old body and emerging as a younger person, the events shift their focus to a conversation between Batman and Duke, with Bruce revealing that where Duke is concerned about Calendar Man returning and constantly thinking up new ideas, their roles as heroes is to meet the challenge and come back themselves equally more intelligent and capable. And so with the story wrapping itself up, this seems to reveal the shortcoming of the issue. Nothing really happens. The comic makes no reference to Snyder's Batman aside from Duke's parents during the events of Endgame. It makes no reference to the supposed death of Bruce Wayne after Endgame and Commissioner Gordon taking on the mantle of Batman, and as far as I can tell, the entire issue treats the events of DCU as if they never happened, picking up almost immediately after the Joker's perceived death at the conclusion of Endgame, with Bruce Wayne taking Duke on as a ward. So as we continue our discussion on DC Rebirth, for those of you guys that had a chance to see my episode of Comics and Coffee on Sunday, we had talked about how with Hickman's Fantastic Four and with those various videos being ongoing stories in the background of my regular videos, that I was kind of experimenting with you guys. I was looking to see how you guys would be receptive to having double videos almost every day and having stories in the background of our existing content on, character discussions and different things like that. And so what I want to do is I want to start paying a little more attention to DC, simply because it really didn't make any sense to change from Marvel Explained to Comics Explained if I'm not going to give DC some due diligence. And to be honest, I'm really just now getting around to reading a lot of the DC Rebirth content, but I'm absolutely loving Batman. And so what I want to do is basically run over this story, I guess the entire 6-part series, Batman I Am Gotham. And we're going to do one video over the course of this week, or I guess one issue over the course of this week, so you guys will get the full brunt of the experience and decide for yourselves whether or not, Batman from DC Rebirth is something that you're interested in picking up. But I Am Gotham, of course, is the official start of Batman Rebirth in DC Comics under the writing of Tom King. Now, one of the big differences here is in the Batman Rebirth #1 issue, that was basically kind of giving us a status quo. And what it was telling us is that Duke Thomas, a character who appeared as part of Snyder's run on Batman, who was the leader of the vigilante group calling themselves Robins, that he's basically been taken under the wing of Batman as the new Robin. And so at this point, we basically had several Robins. Of course, the first was Dick Grayson, the second was Jason Todd, the third was, I think, Carrie Kelly, followed by Stephanie Brown, and then I think we got into Tim Drake, but I'm not gonna swear that I'm correct about that chronology. Well, Duke Thomas comes to us as the newest Robin, and so this basically gives us a chance to see how Batman is relating to him. Now, what we do here is we initially pick up in a flight. Now, in terms of the people in this flight, they're not extremely important for this first issue, but it does give us some context. Right now, we basically have Bruce Wayne and we have Commissioner Gordon talking to one another. Now, they're talking about how there was a raid on Fort Marshall, but that somebody had basically taken off with a handful of rockets. Somebody had taken off with weapons. And the question was, well, what are they going to do with them? What's the big plan here? But even then, they're not really talking too heavily about it. And so it's just kind of like, okay, what direction are things really going in here? Because Tim King is basically playing the very slow road here. He's playing the very slow game, so to speak. But in the middle of their conversation, Batman and Commissioner Gordon witness the plane being blown up after a rocket seemingly hits it from behind. And so what we do, of course, is we pick up with Bruce Wayne immediately taking off, and he's talking to Duke. And what he says is, he's talking to Alfred, and what he says is he needs a plan to basically figure out what's going on with this plane. And that's the basis behind this particular comic. This whole first issue is showing us the lengths that Batman goes to. And this is one of the reasons why this is so cool, is because Tom King doesn't leave us hanging. Tom King doesn't suddenly just jump from one scenario to the other. He takes us through every single step of the way. And so one of the first things he does is Batman sends out an SOS to the Justice League, specifically to Superman and to Hal Jordan, because it would make sense to us as the reader that if a plane was crashing to the ground in Gotham City, that Superman would get there in seconds, in moments. He'd be able to save the plane and everything would be fine. If he wasn't able to do it, Hal Jordan might be able to get there a little bit slower, but he'd get there pretty fast and he'd be able to use his power ring to save the plane. But what Tom King is basically telling us here is that, or I guess he's providing an answer to all those individuals who ask the question, if Batman encounters a scenario where it seems insurmountable that he can come out on top, why doesn't he contact the Justice League? And the response that Alfred gives Batman is that nobody in the Justice League is picking up. They're all busy off doing their own things. They're fighting their own villains or dealing with their own individual problems, and they're just not available to help Batman. And so this allows us to continue on with this line of thought that Bruce Wayne is going to have to be the one to save this plane. And so what he does is he starts talking to Duke, and this again is really cool because this is not something that we see very often. With Duke and Batman conversing, what Duke says is that there is a time frame here, that the plane is, I guess that the Batman himself will have to drive at about 122 miles per hour, that he will have to hit a ramp, so to speak, or hit a bridge at a certain angle, and then he'll have to take off and he'll have to jump from the Batmobile and you'll have to land on top of the plane. And so they're basically just working out exactly how this is going to happen. And again, this is really cool because usually, even with Scott Snyder's Batman, as great as it was, usually he simply just jumps from one scenario to the other. And the extent of detective work comes in the sense of Batman analyzing some little detail, but we don't really see them going over the mathematical angles. And all this really does is show us how smart Bruce Wayne is, that Bruce Wayne isn't simply just a guy that can put clues together. Bruce Wayne is a guy who has, mathematic probabilities, statistics rattle around in his head, and he's able to calculate those incredibly fast with the assistance of Duke. And so what we do here is we pick up with Batman jetting out of the Batmobile and landing on top of the plane. Now this is actually pretty awesome because he's talking to Commissioner Gordon, and Commissioner Gordon again is basically driving under this plane trying to get to where it's going to land, and to the best of everybody's estimates, including Batman himself, that it's going to land in the Tri-Corner Yards. And Batman's idea is to keep this from happening. And the reason why is because if it did, there are crowds of people there, and the loss of life would be insane if they all died. And so what Batman's trying to do is he's trying to get the plane to land in the Gulf of Blackgate, in a giant body of water. That way, the only individuals who will be in any real measure of jeopardy are those in the plane. And of course, the goal of Batman is to mitigate as much of that, of as much loss of life as possible. And so from this point, it's really just Batman flying onto the plane, landing onto it, attaching, different pieces of machinery, attaching little jets and so on and so forth. And the goal is to basically steer the plane in a direction to where it'll pass through two buildings and to effectively guide it, even though it can't be controlled by conventional means. Now, from here, we transition to the inside of a plane. And this is one of the reasons why I think this thing is so cool, because with Batman comics, we largely just focus on Bruce Wayne. The only real view that we get outside of his own perception of what's going on is usually from a villain. Like a villain is watching events unfold, or Commissioner Gordon is watching events unfold, and we see their perspective, but we don't really get the perspective of average people, of your average Joes. And so what happens is really just this guy who's just freaking out. I mean, the plane is crashing, the guy's, terrified, rightfully so, and he's basically saying, like, they're in Gotham City, all they have is Batman. It'd be better if they landed in Metropolis because Superman would have saved them instantly. It'd be better if they landed in, Coast City because Hal Jordan would have saved them, or Jessica Cruz, or, any number of other factors. Simon Baz, for example, probably could have saved him, but they're in Gotham City. There's a man that flies, that glides around as a bat. What can he possibly do? Because he's just a regular guy. At the same time, he thinks that, he starts saying things like maybe they deserve it because they live in a city full of criminals that have gone absolutely insane. And so this isn't really designed to point to some greater picture. This isn't really designed to point to some great, big, huge concept. It's simply to show that different people react to situations differently. And this is just kind of gives us a bigger understanding, or a better understanding, of how regular Joes deal with life and death in the face of Batman doing what he can to basically save their lives. And so the result here is that while Batman is attaching various artifacts, what he does is he starts talking to Duke. And this is one of the ways in which the Batman story really starts to get cool. This is one of the reasons why I think Tom King is doing such a great job writing. Bruce Wayne's perception begins to shift away from complete confidence in the fact that they're going to be able to save the people on this planet plane to the possibility that he might die. And the way that this happens is as Alfred is talking to Bruce Wayne and as Bruce Wayne is talking to Alfred, what he says is, or I guess what he asks is, would his parents be proud? Now, this is basically just kind of Bruce Wayne accepting his fate. This is Bruce Wayne accepting the fact that he may not live here. Now, of course, we switch to a scenario whereby somebody is watching or standing over the body of another individual, and this person seems to have been the one that shot the rocket, that shot the plane down, and this person's dead. We don't really know who this individual is that's watching him, but the result is that we switch back to, Batman's conversations with Alfred, and Batman's basically kind of getting his affairs in order. He tells Alfred that if he doesn't make it, that on the off chance that he didn't survive or that some event happened that would have killed him, he prepared a guide, so to speak, a few words of wisdom for those individuals who were closest to him, the members of the Bat family, and Alfred himself. And he instructs Alfred to pass those little bits of information on to those members of the Bat family. But he also says that if something happens to him, that Duke should go train under the direction of Dick Grayson, just because of the fact that Dick Grayson is as good of a teacher as Batman will be. Now, this gives us perception of how Bruce Wayne views Dick Grayson. We've always known that Batman viewed Dick Grayson with the utmost respect, even though they've had their falling out, even though they've had their disagreements, they haven't always seen eye to eye. He was the first sidekick and he spent the most time alongside Bruce Wayne as Robin. And over the course of Dick Grayson's life, he's even played the role of Batman, a time or two. And the result is that he is as good of a Batman as Bruce Wayne will ever be. And this is really just Bruce Wayne confirming it in the comics. I mean, we've seen this before, but this is DC Rebirth. This is basically, DC giving us a perception of what to expect going forward. And so, Tom King is effectively telling us it's not as though with DC Rebirth, all that history and all that, importance, all that, the relationship between Batman and Dick Grayson has just kind of gone away. Instead, it's just as strong as it ever was. And so as this plane appears to crash into the ground, just before it hits, or crash into the water rather, just before it hits, the plane is lifted up from the water. And Batman's initial thought is that it's Clark, that Superman has come to the rescue. But instead, he's greeted by two individuals. The man addresses himself as Gotham, and the woman addresses, or I guess he tells Batman that this woman is Gotham Girl, that this is their city, and that they're here to save it. So as we pick up with part 2 of Batman with DC Rebirth, I was scrolling through the comments of the last video and somebody had asked the question, what happened to the New 52 Batman? And this is kind of an indication to me that not everybody is aware of what went on with Batman in the New 52. And so what I want to do is take, I guess, the first part of this video to kind of clear this up and to make things easy to understand with this character, because Batman can be a bit confusing when it comes to the New 52. So as we know, in 2011, DC rebooted everything. The New 52 was a line-wide reboot. Whether you loved it or hate it, that's what we got. And what DC originally established was that it had only been 5 years between the time that superheroes first emerged and the start of the New 52. Now, with regards to DC Rebirth, the only thing we really know right now is that it was actually 10 years that were stolen from people's lives, and that was all done supposedly at Dr. Manhattan. But again, this is a very primitive story. We have no real idea of what direction DC's going in with that. And so that's really the only thing we know. I can't really offer you any more info besides that, but virtually everybody in DC Comics got a reboot. The Teen Titans were rebooted, Superman was rebooted, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, the whole 9 yards. The only two characters who were not rebooted was the Green Lantern and Batman, and that was simply because of the fact that their comics were selling so well. It didn't make any sense to reboot them. It was a classic adage, if it works, don't fix it. And so with the character of Batman, what DC did is they came back and they retold his origin story. We got that in Batman Zero Year, and it told us what was going on in the life of Bruce Wayne from the time his parents died up until the time he became Batman, when Batman issue number 1 came out with the New 52. The issue with this is there was no explanation on his backstory. There was no, or I guess no, not really his backstory. There was no explanation about all the stories that had happened before he was, before the New 52. We didn't know if stories like Hush had actually happened. We didn't know if stories like Nightfall, if the Killing Joke, if things like that had actually happened in the New 52. Instead, DC just left it open-ended, and they're still doing that. What DC says is none of the stories that happened in Batman's history before the New 52 actually happened unless they say they did. And so during Batman Eternal, for example, we saw the villain Hush return, and DC established that the storyline Hush did happen in the New 52. We had reference to the Killing Joke in the story of Barbara Gordon, Batgirl's own line of comics, and so we know that Killing Joke happened. And we had actually seen reference to the events of Nightfall when Bane broke Batman's back, and that was referenced. What DC is basically telling us is that whenever they reference a story from before the New 52, that story happened in the 5-year window. And so this Batman that we're seeing right now is the pre-New 52 Batman. It's just DC's kind of left it open as to whether or not the stories that happened before the New 52 actually took place. I know it's a little confusing, it's a little weird, not really sure why they chose to do that, but the best rule of thumb to take here is that unless an event like Nightfall is referenced, unless an event like Hush or like the Killing Joke is referenced, it's best to assume it just didn't happen. I know it kind of boggles the mind in terms of like all that stuff happened over the course of 5 years, but you know, you got to kind of go with it for what it is. You know, it's comics. Don't think about it too hard. You'll make your head explode. That's how I live my life when it comes to comics. But the fact remains that now that we're picking up with issue number 2, in the last video, we had basically just talked about how Batman was in Gotham City. It's his normal wear and tear where he's saving the city. Of course, Duke Thomas is the new Robin to take the place of Damian Wayne, at least at the moment anyway. And what's basically happening right now is we're continuing the event of the arrival of 2 characters that came at the end of the last video. The first one referencing himself as Gotham, and the second one being Gotham Girl. And so what we do is we pick up with kind of, with Solomon Grundy, basically. And for those of you guys who don't know, Solomon Grundy is, I wouldn't go as far as to say he's DC's Incredible Hulk, just because of the fact that he predates Incredible Hulk as far as I'm aware, but he is one of the strongest characters in the DC universe, and he's a very intimidating foe. But he always has a mantra that goes along with him, and anybody that's read DC Comics and is familiar with Solomon Grundy knows that mantra. Of course, the mantra being born on a Monday, christened on a Tuesday, married on a Wednesday, took ill on a Thursday, grew worse on Friday, died on Saturday, buried on Sunday. That's his thing. And so while this is happening, while Solomon Grundy is basically tearing apart this statue in Gotham City, Gotham Girl and Gotham are both trying to defend it as best they can. They're trying to I guess, stave off Solomon Grundy. And what this is designed to do, what Tom King is basically showing us, is 2 things. The first is that Batman isn't necessarily against them being there, but the second is that they're very inexperienced. And we would expect this. You know, Batman has fought Solomon Grundy on a multitude of occasions, and so one, he knows the best way to deal with him, he knows the best way to interact with him, and he knows his weaknesses. But for Gotham and Gotham Girl, they don't know this. All they know is that Solomon Grundy is just a bad guy who's trying to tear things up. And so what ends up happening here is, of course, Batman subdues Solomon Grundy by using his momentum against him. Now, this is actually one of the funny things, because I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, and he had read Batman issue number 2, and his thought was that Batman had actually picked up Solomon Grundy. And of course, the answer to that is absolutely not. Solomon Grundy's way too heavy for Batman to lift. This is simply just an example where Solomon Grundy's running at Batman, Batman uses the momentum and flips him over onto the ground. But of course, Solomon Grundy is also someone that doesn't necessarily fear Batman, but even if it's on a base level, understands that Batman's not a guy to be trifled with. And so what Batman does is once he has him pinned down, of course, he says that that if Solomon Grundy gets up, it's going to hurt a whole lot more. Now, this is where the inexperience of Gotham and Gotham Girl come into play. And this is where Tom King tells us Batman isn't really against them being there. Of course, what Batman says is that they were wasting too much time, that in Batman's mind, it's all a matter of calculations. It's all a matter of figuring things out. It's all a matter of knowing what's going to happen within a reasonable time frame. And he tells them that because they had wasted so much time, because Solomon Grundy was moving so fast, if Batman had not intervened, it would have resulted in the death of a homeless man. At least we presume he's homeless, but it would have resulted in the death of this man. And so what Batman says is he's been watching them, that they've been doing the best they can to keep Gotham City safe. And this makes sense because Batman wouldn't simply allow just 2 people to show up in Gotham and start acting in a superhero fashion without keeping an eye on them. Even if he doesn't necessarily intervene, he would definitely be aware of what's going on. And that's what's happened here. Batman's been watching them and he simply says, they're doing good. They're doing some very good things, but the goal is to do better. Now, he doesn't give them an actual idea of what to do on how to do better. And this is kind of a funny thing with Batman because unless you are Robin, Batman doesn't really, take you under his wing and teach you everything step by step. With Robin, of course, he does that because in Batman's mind, Robin is designed to be his successor one day. Tim Drake, Dick Grayson, Stephanie Brown, Carrie Kelly, Damian Wayne, they were all designed to be successors, or at least they were trained to be successors for Batman. They all went off on their own individual story arcs, and of course, as we know, Dick Grayson went on to become Nightwing, Tim Drake, I believe, went on to be Red Robin, but we know that they've taken on their own identities. But if the worst case scenario happened and Batman died, any one of them would be able to take up the mantle in his place, especially someone like Dick Grayson. But the issue here is that with Gotham and Gotham Girl not being given a clear understanding of what it is that they're supposed to do, they ask for it. Gotham simply says, if we're not doing what it is that we need to do in order to be effective superheroes for the city of Gotham, then tell us what we need to do. Tell us how to be, crime fighters, tell us how to fight intelligently as opposed to just kind of being, you know, a broadsword swinging through the city of Gotham at bad guys. And so what we do is we transition later, and we pick up with Bruce Wayne when he is, you know, monitoring various footage, or I guess different forms of footage that he has on Gotham and Gotham Girl. And in his mind, it's kind of a tough situation because he has largely been the sole protector of Gotham for quite some time. He's had sidekicks, he's had people that helped him, but when it came down to it, we as readers always look to Batman as the sole savior of Gotham City. But to have two superheroes here who are, for all intents and purposes, more or less a version of Superman. They may not necessarily be as strong, but they fly, they have, you know, super hearing, or I guess ultra hearing, you know, they have, you know, incredible vision and so on and so forth. They have all the feats of Superman at a, you know, to a lesser degree and of a different name. It's kind of a situation of, is Batman really even useful here anymore? If the time comes when they are trained to the epitome of what it means to be a superhero, if the time comes when they are as good as Batman in terms of being able to analyze the situation and being able to neutralize that situation, then of what use would Batman be? It would be as if Superman showed up in Gotham City and said he was going to start protecting it. But at the same time, he also realizes that sometimes he just needs help. That with the incident of the plane, that with the various asteroids and things like that, with all the different threats that had faced Gotham City, if they were beyond Batman's normal ability to take care of, that Gotham and Gotham Girl had done it. They had basically, you know, they had saved the plane, they had, you know, used, I guess, diverted asteroids, so on and so forth. They were doing the things that Bruce Wayne couldn't do. And in his mind, it's a struggle because he's looking at these two and he's basically seeing the fact that he's becoming obsolete. He's seeing a Gotham City that no longer needs him. And this is one of the reasons why Tom King writing is so cool, because we don't really see this very often. We see stories where Batman goes against overwhelming odds, but we don't really see stories where Batman sits down and has to ponder the fact that he could be obsolete, the fact that he wouldn't really matter anymore. Obsolescence, I'm not really sure if that's a word or not, but I'm going to use it as a word. I'm going to make it one if it's not. But anyway, with Alfred showing up, Alfred, of course, you know, brings us back to Earth. He brings us back to, you know, the everyday life of Batman. And that's one of the great things about Alfred in this story, is he always keeps us anchored to the present. And he basically tells us that in Wayne Manor, there was about 250 guests who were all there to see Bruce Wayne for a, you know, a children's hospital gala that they've put together. And this is just, you know, of course, we don't really see Bruce Wayne go off and do, you know, perform in that gala because we don't really need to. Instead, Tom King deviates our attention to building another plot, building an upcoming set of events. And what he tells us is that with Commissioner Gordon working over, you know, staying over for about 2 or 3 hours to do whatever it is that he does in the Gotham City Police Department, that there is apparently a man who is down there waiting for him. And when this man comes up to meet Commissioner Gordon, what he says is that he is the person that set Solomon Grundy free. Now, our initial thought, or at least my initial thought when I first heard this, was that maybe this guy was just some kind of, you know, villain mastermind, that with him drawing some kind of a blade that he was actually going to kill Commissioner Gordon. I would have found that hard to believe this early in Tom King's run, but that was my initial thought, is that's what he was intending to do. Instead, he doesn't tell us that. What he tells us is that his name is Bob Castro, that he served in the military, but the reason why he set Solomon Grundy free was because of Solomon Grundy's extreme strength, and that he had been warned that the monster men are coming. Now, we don't get anything more than this from this guy, Bob Castro, and the reason why is because Bob takes the knife and he stabs himself in the neck with it and kills himself. Now, this is really kind of cool here, because in a lot of Batman stories, we usually have like the one, you know, the exposition, the one point where the guy comes in and says, here's everything you need to know about events that are coming up. Instead, Tom King doesn't do that. He's very he's very Scott Snyder in that way, in the sense that he's kind of building up to a major plot thread and we just sort of have to read things in order to understand what all's going on. But what we do here is we transition back to Bruce Wayne at the gala, and Bruce Wayne receives the bat signal. And so while he is spending time with what appears to be a very attractive woman, he basically takes off. He leaves. And the result is that he ends up having somewhat of a conversation with Duke. Duke, of course, you know, carries on the conversation a bit with Alfred, but in the end, he says that because of the bat signal, because of everything that's going on, that he basically needs to leave. Now, this is one of the other cool things too, is he gives us some insight in how he views Gotham and Gotham Girl. We, as readers, know that Bruce Wayne has a very hard time trusting anybody. In fact, he trusts nobody, and he even says that he doesn't trust Alfred. Now, this is a lie. We know that Bruce Wayne trusts Alfred with his life. In fact, Alfred's been such a long part of Bruce Wayne's history that unless you're reading All-Star Batman, you have no reason to distrust Alfred. I'm not going to spoil that at the moment. If you haven't read All-Star Batman, you definitely need to go check it out. But the fact remains here that, Bruce Wayne says that he does not trust Gotham and Gotham Girl. Now, it doesn't mean that he thinks they're bad. It's simply that he's waiting to see what goes on. He's playing it smart. He's playing the long game. And this is a hallmark of Bruce Wayne. He always does that. Whenever he encounters anybody new, he always plays a long game. He always waits to see what's going on, to see what their motives are before he really begins to extend any measure of trust to them. And in fact, we've been seeing that with Superman, with the pre-New 52 Superman living in the New 52 continuity during the Son of Superman story that I went over. Bruce Wayne says flat out that they don't know him. They don't know that version of Superman. They know the other version of Superman who died. They fought alongside him, but they don't know this pre-New 52 Superman. And so they don't really have a reason to trust him, but they will simply because of the fact that he has done everything he can to prove that he's a legitimate guy. Much like this with Gotham Girl and Gotham, when they show up at the bat signal, Jim Gordon is initially afraid. He's like, what in the world's going on here? You're not Bruce Wayne, you're not Batman. And Batman simply says, don't worry about it, they're with him. And so what ends up happening is Jim Gordon basically tells them what all's taking place, what all is happening, that there was a man who showed up that, killed himself after he claimed that the monster men were coming. And he initially asked Gotham and Gotham Girl, do they know anything that's been going on strange, anything that would indicate that, there are some kind of enemy force that are showing up in Gotham City. Now, of course, Gotham and Gotham Girl say no, and Batman says no, he doesn't know either, but they all sort of reference the instance where the rocket was shot at the plane, and the person who had shot that rocket had also committed suicide. And so what this seems to indicate is that perhaps there's a series of events that are unfolding. This indicates that maybe all these individuals work for the Monster Men, but in some form or fashion, they seem to be tied into the concept of the Monster Men, and they ended up committing acts in their own name. Now, what's really cool about this too, at least what we're going to see with the end of this story, is if I were to hazard a guess, and of course, not spoiling anything, to sort of live in the moment, to sort of live in right now. If I were to hazard a guess, I would say, well, maybe it's because of the fact that all these individuals, or these people are part of a larger plan. They've been assigned tasks, and they're carrying these tasks out. But whatever the case may be, in the end, Batman basically bails out without any of them knowing. This is actually what's really cool. And again, this kind of points to the inexperience of Gotham and Gotham Girl. Commissioner Gordon is used to Batman just vanishing up in smoke, just disappearing and going off to do his own thing. Gotham and Gotham Girl are not used to this. Not only that, despite their abilities, they can't find Batman anywhere. Now, we as comic book readers know that this is most likely due to the fact that Batman has honed his skills in such a way that he can avoid Superman if he wanted to. But the fact remains here that with him vanishing, this is just kind of Batman being Batman. It's just not really designed to be an extremely important moment. It's just designed to be something a little funny, something a little interesting, for us to get a bit of a laugh out of. But the fact remains that what we do here is we switch to another location. We initially pick up with a guy who's not really named, and this man is simply just answering questions. He's shown images of his face where he's scared, where he's happy, he's sad, and he's angry. And he's being asked, are you scared, are you happy, are you sad, and are you angry? And each time he replies, yes, Professor. And what we learn is that he's actually talking to Professor Hugo Strange. Now, this is not the biggest part. The biggest, kind of end of the story reveal here is that Hugo Strange seems to be working in accordance with the United States government and Amanda Waller of the Suicide Squad. And so this is just one of those instances where the plot thickens, where things become a lot more complicated. And so what we'll do is we'll find out in the next video, of course, where this line of thought is leading us to. And yeah, it's pretty cool so far. Like, the story is actually pretty interesting. So as we continue our discussion on Batman Rebirth, we pick up now with I Am Gotham Part 3. Now, when it comes to multi-part story arcs, they're usually 3 issues or more, and there's a reason for that. Odd numbers are more often chosen than even numbers, but, with DC, they tend to stick with 6-issue story arcs. But regardless of the circumstances, everything's done in sets of 3. The first 2 issues are done to sort of set up the story. The 3rd and 4th issues are designed to effectively enhance or to add existing information, and the 5th and 6th issues are designed to conclude everything. And with issue number 3, Tom King begins the process of revealing the backstory of Gotham and Gotham Girl. What we do is we pick up at some point in the relative past, not too far, but at some point in the past. Again, we're not given a definitive date here. We just know that it was probably a decade or so. But during a time when a family was basically leaving a theater, this was very indicative of Bruce Wayne's experience. And in fact, when I first picked up this story, I thought that it was a retelling of Bruce Wayne's origin, which seemed a little strange because the boy was older than Bruce Wayne was when his parents were killed. But much like that scenario, this family is heading down an alleyway. Why they chose to head down a dark alleyway, I don't understand, but they chose to head down an alleyway. In the midst of walking down this alleyway, the most, predictable scenario happens, and they're held at gunpoint. Now, where the father steps in and tries to protect both his wife and his son, the man is basically subdued. The father is almost immediately subdued, and the result is that the gun again is turned to the mother and eventually the son. But Batman steps in here, and Batman basically saves the life of this family. Now, for Bruce Wayne, this is a big deal because this is effectively a repeat of the scenario in which he lost his parents. And this kind of situation resonates more with Bruce Wayne than any other kind of situation. Despite the things that the Joker does, that Clayface, Two-Face, the Penguin, so on and so forth, they're usually part of a bigger scheme in the comic book realm. They're part of a bigger ongoing set of events in Gotham City. But things like this that depict a family being held at gunpoint in the same fashion as Bruce Wayne's family when his parents died, this strikes a chord, and Bruce Wayne immediately lashes out. But for Batman, this is also a chance for him to be the person that wasn't there when his family died. And this is what he does, as this husband and wife and son, as they're basically consoling one another, having survived the encounter, Batman tells them that it's okay to be scared. They're going to be scared for quite some time, that everybody gets scared for one reason or another. But the important thing is to learn from that fear, to learn to fight fear, and to go forward a stronger person. Now, of course, what we know is that this young boy was basically Gotham, and the young girl, presumably his sister, who we'll find out here in a little bit, is Gotham Girl. Now, the connection between Gotham and Gotham Girl and the events that we just went over is revealed to us when we switch to Robinsonville and Gotham City. Now, with regards to Gotham as a whole, this is one of the big misnomers. Gotham is largely considered to be a singular place in and of itself. Gotham City does have suburbs, but it's still considered to be part of Gotham in and of itself. And so what we find is that the parents who had been held at gunpoint are meeting with a man from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And what they're telling us is that after the incident whereby they had been held at gunpoint, that the boy named Hank had basically become obsessed with Batman to a degree. The word that Tom King chooses to use here is enamored, but the evidence seems to contradict that. The evidence says otherwise. With all the various news clippings and all the posters and all the pinups and so on and so forth, it seems as though Hank has developed an obsession with Batman as a concept. In addition to this, while his younger sister was not present at the robbery because she was at a friend's house, in the end, the experience that Hank had basically rolled over onto her, that she sort of became just as obsessed as he did with the idea of overcoming her own personal fears. Now, Tom King's being a little thin here with regards to, the relationship between a brother and a sister in terms of how one's experiences impact the other. We can really just kind of take it at face value that in some form or fashion, he had basically reached out to her and he had informed her of her experience, or I guess of his experience, and how it changed his life. But the fact remains that his sister Claire became just as obsessed as he did, or it seems to become as obsessed as Hank did, with regards to Batman. And so this basically shaped his life, and it shaped her life, that Hank began going around and committing as many, good deeds as he possibly could, volunteering, different things like that, that he began weight training, he began exercising, pushing his body to the peak of a physical experience, that both Claire and himself began to experiment with, forensic evidence, began to read about, science as much as they possibly could. And this is really just designed to say that instead of them, having some sort of guide to take them through their own experiences, instead, they followed the exact same road as Bruce Wayne, that Bruce Wayne taught himself a lot of the things that he knew. He also traveled around the world to gain a lot of these experiences, but he taught himself a lot of the things that he knew. And the result is that he proved himself to be a formidable combatant and take on the Batman mantle in full force. Much like Bruce Wayne, Hank and Claire have done the exact same thing. And in fact, like Bruce Wayne traveling around the world, they did the same. They went overseas, they did, some work in some very dangerous areas, and this went towards expanding their view of the world, but also how harsh humanity can be and how important it is to stand up for what's right, to do the right thing in virtually any circumstance. Now, the connection between Hank and, Claire with regards to why they're being questioned or why their parents are being questioned by the FBI comes into focus when Tom King shifts the argument. And what he does is he begins having the FBI agent ask questions about money transfers. Now, this is not usually something that's handled by the FBI. This is usually handled by the IRS, so it's a little fishy. But the fact remains here that if there's criminal issues involved, involved, well, then the FBI would begin to involve themselves in the events. And so at the very least, the FBI is just kind of poking around and asking the question why there's two new superheroes in Gotham and where they came from. But what the parents of Hank and Claire say is that at some point while they were overseas, they got a request to wire a large amount of money. No reason was given, but because they were their parents and they were concerned for their well-being, but also because Hank and Claire had been extremely charitable people in how they lived their lives, there didn't really seem to be any concern that anything nefarious was happening. And so they transferred the money, and then I guess a few months later, Hank and Claire appeared in Gotham City as heroes who effectively had the same power as Superman. Now again, this FBI agent's just kind of poking around, or at least a person claiming to be an FBI agent is just kind of poking around, trying to get a lay of the land and trying to understand everything that's going on. But the end result here is that we're getting somewhat of a mysterious backstory. We're not getting all the information. And so before anything else is revealed, the FBI agent effectively leaves, and as he gets into his car, we realize that he's using the alias of Matches Malone, which is also a name that Bruce Wayne uses. And so in effect, Batman's poking around at the history of these two individuals, trying to find out where they came from. Now, in truth, I wasn't really expecting this. I actually thought that it was probably some kind of a henchman of a villain or something along those lines, but this makes sense. This makes perfect sense. You know, with Batman basically doing his research, kind of hunting around behind the scenes, it would stand to reason that he would go as far as to look up the heritage of these two people and to find out where they came from. But it also gives us a little bit of perception when it comes to Bruce Wayne. You know, as we talked about in the last video, Bruce is not a very trusting person when it comes to anybody, to be quite frank. Of course, the vehicle that he was driving was not an actual car. Instead, it was basically a housing for his Bat motorcycle. I'm not sure exactly what it's called. You know, the Bat wheel, I guess. I can't remember. But it's basically, you know, this is just a multifaceted depiction of the deception, the lengths that Bruce Wayne will go to get the information he needs. It doesn't necessarily make him a bad person. It's just that at times it's necessary for him to be duplicitous in order to gain honest answers. And so what we do is we switch to Claire and Hank, who are in the middle of holding up a bridge that seems to have collapsed. And while Batman is racing and trying to get over there in order to keep things, you know, in order to both monitor Hank and Claire to make sure they're being heroes effectively, as well as do what he can to ensure the safety of those bystanders, we also see that while he is able to do this, that the entire situation is being monitored by Hugo Strange. Now, as we had talked about in a previous video, Hugo Strange is a well-known, villain of the Batman landscape, but he usually uses his experience or his knowledge for the purpose of manipulating other people, but he's really one of these villains as kind of the hidden hand. You know, it's usually a circumstance just like this, where it turns out that Hugo Strange was behind everything. And so while the bridge is saved, or I guess the bystanders on the bridge are saved, you know, while things seem to come to a close, eventually Claire and Hank are met by the arrival of Psycho Pirate, a villain capable of manipulating the emotions of virtually anybody he comes into contact with. And so the question becomes, what direction are things taking now? So as we continue our discussion on Batman Rebirth, what we do here is pick up now with the aftermath of Psycho Pirate seemingly causing Gotham to go insane. And for those of you guys who are just now joining us in this series who may have just stumbled across this video, DC Rebirth is a line of comics written by DC designed to basically take what worked before the New 52 and blend it with the New 52. And with characters like Batman, he's kind of a weird quagmire. Of course, we talked about this in the last video, but Batman didn't really get a reboot per se in the New 52. Instead, it was just kind of up in the air whether or not his continuity had stayed intact. And we were just sort of left to our own devices. You know, stories like Hush, like Nightfall, like The Killing Joke, they weren't considered part of Batman's continuity in the New 52 unless they were referenced. And so we didn't really get any solid ground. We were really just kind of walking on quicksand when it came to his backstory. But the fact remains that as part of DC Rebirth, writer Tom King had introduced two new characters. The first was Gotham and the second was Gotham Girl. Now, in the series up to this point, they had basically saved a plane that was preparing to crash into a river, and Batman was trying to keep the plane protected, trying to keep the plane from crashing, but ultimately he was unsuccessful, and he was even facing his own death in the process. But because Gotham and Gotham Girl seemed to have powers that made them almost identical to Superman and Supergirl, they were able to save the plane, and by virtue of that save, you know, however many hundreds of people. Now, what the series had done up to this point, it is basically given us a view of Batman in terms of how he sees Gotham and Gotham Girl. And in his mind, he had done a little bit of back search, a little bit of investigation into their history. We saw that in the last video, where he had gone to talk to their parents, and it had been Batman himself who had inspired them. We didn't know exactly how they became Gotham and Gotham Girl, but we know that Hank was in a situation much like, Bruce Wayne's parents, whereby Hank and his parents were walking out of a theater. They head down in a dark alleyway. They were held at gunpoint, but Batman showed up and saved the day. After that, Hank had become obsessed with Batman, and his obsession had spread to his sister Claire. And the result was that the two of them had basically become great humans, great people. They had gone on humanitarian missions. They had done as much research as they could with forensics. They had basically become their own variations of Bruce Wayne. And the result was that after some set amount of time that wasn't really given to us, they had borrowed money from their parents, and then they had reemerged as Gotham and Gotham Girl with superhuman powers. And so what this does is it picks up again with the last issue, where the villain Psycho Pirate had showed up under the control of Dr. Hugo Strange and had used his powers to seemingly drive Gotham insane. Now, to say that Psycho Pirate has powers is actually a misnomer, and I probably shouldn't have said that. Psycho Pirate, to the best of my knowledge, and this is where, Tom King's not absolutely clear here, Psycho Pirate can be a bit confusing. In the New 52, he was infected with a virus, giving him, some measure of psionic mind abilities by Brainiac. But in the pre-New 52 continuity, he was just a guy who was really good at manipulating people's emotions. Tom King doesn't really give us any definitive explanation on which Psycho Pirate that we're talking about. It could very well be that it is the, pre-New 52, or it could be the New 52. It could be one version wearing the costume of the other. We don't really know. All we do know is that he manipulated the emotions of Gotham, and this is shown to us when Gotham had gone on a tear and basically killed 27 soldiers. Now, his sister Claire is left behind, and she just keeps repeating the same things, that she's scared, that she's very scared. And of course, this is a byproduct of Psycho Pirate's manipulations. Once he latches onto a person, once he latches onto a being, regardless of who that being is and where they hail from in the multiverse, once he manipulates their emotions, that manipulation stays intact unless someone with sufficient ability is able to remove those manipulations. Now, of course, Batman being what he is, there's been different circumstances where he's been successful in doing it and where he hasn't been successful in doing it. It really just kind of calls for what the story needs it to be. But what ends up happening is we show up, or I guess we transition to the rooftop of another building, and we find a guy who's standing on the building and seems to be in the process of committing suicide. Now, Gotham shows up behind this guy, and basically, it seems as though he's going to talk him down. But Gotham keeps repeating the same thing. I can fix this. We can fix this. It's the same thing being said over and over and over again. But the guy says no. The guy says that no, this cannot be fixed, that the monster men are coming. And this is a weird situation here, because what we're going to find at the end of the story is that not everything is what it seems when it comes to the realm of the monster men. But the result is that this man has some kind of a device on his phone, and when he presses the button to activate it, it blows up the building. Now, this seems, I guess is revealed to us, to basically be a flashback in the mind of Claire. And this tells us exactly what was happening right before Psycho Pirate showed up with Hugo Strange and manipulated Gotham. And so in yesterday's video, when we had simply just picked up with Gotham and Gotham Girl in a building that was, immersed in flame, we didn't really know exactly what was going on. This simply just tells us that. But what we do know is that Claire had been taken back to the Batcave, presumably at the request of Batman, where she's being cared for by both Alfred and Duke Thomas. Now, this is kind of a funny thing here, and I really liked what Tom King was doing with this. With Duke Thomas, one of the things that I've kind of misspoken about so far in the series is that Duke Thomas was supposed to be a Robin, which is sort of ironic because I covered this in my Batman Rebirth video. Duke Thomas is not actually supposed to be a Robin. That was a mistake that I made in the previous videos. Duke Thomas is a character that's just being groomed to be someone, presumably taking the place of Batman. That seems to be the common idea here. I don't recall whether or not Batman had actually stated that in Batman Rebirth. I'm pretty sure he did. I think he just simply said that Duke was being groomed for something else. But the overall theme here is that Batman, especially with the events that had transpired this far in the I Am Gotham series, Bruce Wayne is coming to the conclusion that with everything that's happened up to this point, with Court of Owls, Night of Owls, with the return of Joker in Death of the Family, Batman Endgame, Bruce Wayne's kind of coming to grips with his own mortality, that it seems as though he's basically losing his grip on Gotham City itself. And the result is that someone needs to be able to step up and take his place. And even if that's not the case, Bruce Wayne also recognizes that he's not immortal. He's not going to live forever. He is going to die at some point in time. And even if Dick Grayson is a great superhero, he's still got Bloodhaven to take care of. Damian Wayne is forming the Teen Titans. Tim Drake is off doing his own thing. Basically, every member of the Bat family has their own situation to take care of, but Duke doesn't have that. Duke was introduced during Scott Snyder's run of Batman. He is a character who led the We Are Robin team. He's basically kind of groomed himself to a degree to be the new Batman, and then Bruce Wayne's just sort of taking the next step and giving him the official training, so to speak. But what's interesting about this is that Duke basically relates to Claire again. She keeps repeating the same thing, that she's scared, and it's kind of funny that Duke doesn't really pick up on this, but in his mind, this is really just a girl that's experienced a very traumatic event. But what Tom King also does here is he seems to set up a possible romance between Claire and Duke Thomas, basically having Duke Thomas, comfort Claire as best he can, and then presumably this may or may not lead to a relationship. The reason why I say that is because in comics, it's usually some kind of traumatic event that leads to a relationship between two characters. Either that, or just they kind of start out as enemies, like Green Arrow and Black Canary did, and then they become, they end up in a relationship later on down the line. But it's their trials and tribulations that strengthen that relationship, of course. And again, this could just be wishful thinking, because I love the character of Duke Thomas, and Duke Thomas needs a girl. So I figure what better, character to have than a newly turned superhero to basically, add to the existing Bat family as someone that can fight alongside Duke Thomas. And so what we do is we transition back to Gotham, and Gotham is again continuing this rampage, talking about how he can fix things, and it's just sort of tearing things apart. But Bruce Wayne shows up, Batman shows up and says, look, everything you've done up to this point, you killed 27 soldiers, you cannot fix this. But what Bruce Wayne also does is he gives us his official view. He gives us an official exposition on what he thinks about Gotham. This is cool because it's something that we haven't seen before. We've seen him poking around, we've seen him doing investigating, but this is basically the conclusion that he came to. When he first met Gotham, Gotham and Gotham Girl had saved that plane from crashing into the river, and Batman realized that they can do things that he can't. They're basically Gotham City's own Superman. He had looked to them as possibly the next step, and what Tom King seemed to be doing, or at least in my mind anyway as I was reading this, is if Duke Thomas is being groomed for a replacement for Bruce Wayne, then Bruce Wayne himself looked at Gotham and Gotham Girl as, kind of a tacked on addition to that, an unexpected way for him to basically bolster the continuation of the Bat family, to kind of continue the legacy going forward. But the result is that Batman says that despite the fact that he looked at both Gotham and Gotham Girl as people that could have saved Gotham City in a way that he couldn't, in the end, Gotham killed 27 people. And it basically seems as though he is officially a villain, or in some form or fashion, a villain that has ulterior motives, or simply just lost his mind, became drunk with power. Now, the one thing to point out here is that Batman does not know about Psycho Pirate and Hugo Strange in the equation. In his mind, he simply just stumbled onto a circumstance where 27 people were killed. The word "I am Gotham" was written in blood, and so Batman simply went by the evidence that existed at hand. But once he and Gotham begin to get into an argument, once they begin to discuss, I guess, debate with one another, what ends up happening is, of course, Gotham takes off after destroying the Batmobile, and Duke chimes in to Batman stating that he's found a pattern, among these soldiers that were killed. And what he says is that their dog tags, when the numbers are rearranged, when the numbers are, when the pattern is discovered, the number comes out to be 24. And what ends up happening is Batman puts two and two together and realizes that, this basically adds up to Task Force X. Now, the way this ties into Task Force X is actually really, really cool. And this is one of the things that I like about Tom King, because he basically expands on the clandestine nature of the Suicide Squad, but he's also, or at least also seems to be leading up to the Justice League versus Suicide Squad event, which would be the first major crossover of the DC Rebirth line of comics. But what he says, or what Duke says, is that after cracking the code, he came to realize that the unit in particular that was killed was the 24th unit of a military group. And the 24th letter of the alphabet is X. And so what Batman ends up doing here is coming to the realization that X stands for Task Force X, which is the other name, that's the official name for the Suicide Squad. And so what he ends up doing is he basically travels to where Amanda Waller, or at least we travel to where Amanda Waller is located, and she's essentially talking to a military general. Now, what's really cool about this is, Amanda Waller in this bunker, in this military base that they're at, is actually below Gotham City itself. And it's the last place we would expect to find find her, to be quite honest. I mean, with Amanda Waller in the New 52, we would have expected to see her in the field, but this is what's so cool about DC Rebirth, is that it gives us the old Amanda Waller that we're used to before the New 52. And so she's the office worker, but she is cold-blooded. I like to think of her as the mob boss of the DC universe, in the sense that she's a person you don't cross. She knows all the right people. She's like the J. Edgar Hoover. She's got info on everybody, and those individuals that she wants to stay in power, and those that she doesn't want to stay in power do not stay in power. And so while she's talking to this military general, the guy says that it's impossible for Batman to find them, that they are, miles below the surface of Gotham City. Batman will never think to look for them in Gotham City. He's got soldiers, he's got huge military grade doors that Batman can't penetrate, but all of that's wrong. And the reason why is because Batman is there. Batman managed to make his way in. Now, we're not told how Batman got in there, and in truth, we don't really need to be told right now, simply because of the fact that it just adds to the cool aspect of Batman. It adds to the fact that Batman can go where he wants, when he wants, how he wants, and there really isn't anybody that can stop him. Plus, it just kind of adds to the mysterious nature, of the Caped Crusader as we know him. But, after he begins talking to Amanda Waller, we learn that from her perspective, Gotham City has been a very tumultuous place for quite some time. And again, this is basically, DC grabbing a combination of the New 52 and the pre-New 52 continuities. Again, with Batman, it's a little finicky here, but, what we're told is that after, the Court of Owls event, the Night of Owls, the Batman Endgame, the Return of the Joker, Death of the Family, all these different events that had taken place, it had basically sent Gotham into a tailspin of chaos and what seemed to be destruction. And the result is that from Amanda Waller's point of view, the city basically needs to be saved. The issue here is that when Hugo Strange and when Psycho Pirate had been assigned to Task Force X, as part of Suicide Squad, they had abandoned their mission and they had basically taken to Gotham City, and that Psycho Pirate himself had manipulated the emotions of Gotham and sent him down a direction of insanity. Amanda Waller had sent those military personnel to try to corral Psycho Pirate and Hugo Strange back in, back to the Suicide Squad, but because they're villains and they do what they do, they ended up having Gotham kill those soldiers anyway. Now, it just seems as though what Hugo Strange and Psycho Pirate want to do is just bring down Gotham City. They just want to instill a whole bunch of violence, chaos, different things like that. But the result is that Amanda Waller turns to Batman and essentially says that he's going to help her bring down Hugo Strange and Psycho Pirate, simply because of the fact that, one, Batman wants the city saved, and two, Amanda Waller will not abide people who abandon their role in the Suicide Squad. She will have them killed if it comes to that. And so what's also really funny about this is one of the things that I really love about the pre-New 52 Amanda Waller, is she simply says that she's only going to help Batman do this if Batman says please. And this is what's so cool about this, because Amanda Waller is literally telling Batman, like, you have to ask me to help you, not because formalities, but because I just feel like seeing you beg. And that's what's so cool about this, is because you don't screw with Amanda Waller. And it's super cool. You ask any DC fan, about Amanda Waller, and they'll tell you by leaps and bounds that, number one, it's the Amanda Waller from the Justice League TV show that was the best one, the Justice League cartoon show, that was the best version of her character. But two, the pre-New 52 Amanda Waller in the comics was probably the best depiction. Of course, she does have fans for the New 52, and it really kind of goes back and forth. But, what we also learn is that where Batman believed that it was 27 people who had been killed, Amanda Waller actually says it's 28. And this is when Batman realizes everything that's going on, or at least realizes, there's a little more going on here than he thought there was. And he ends up traveling back to the home of Hank. Again, we had talked about that in the last video, when Batman had gone to interview Hank's parents to find out who he was, where he came from, what his background was, and what his motivation was for becoming a hero. And what we find is that when Gotham had gone through and killed those 27 soldiers, that there was actually 28. But one of those soldiers had survived and had gone back to the home of Gotham and had basically killed Hank's parents. And so when Hank realized what was going on, he went back to his home as well and found this soldier in the middle of, his parents' murder. And the result is that, Hank is basically freaking out. He's losing his mind. And Batman tries to talk him down. Batman tries to says, no, you can still turn back. You can still stop this. You can still set things back to normal. But Hank basically throws Batman's words back at him and says, no, you cannot fix this. You can only make it worse. And instead, he kills the soldier, casts Batman aside, and then takes off with the intention of destroying Gotham City. Now, again, we're still, we're a couple issues away from the conclusion of this story, so we don't really know the bigger picture here at the moment. We don't know if there's a much bigger role that Hugo Strange and Psycho Pirate are playing here. We simply don't know if they just want to destroy things. We don't really know everything that's happening. But what we do know is that this is going to lead to a pretty significant battle. So as we continue our series on Batman Rebirth, we pick up now with Batman I Am Gotham, the conclusion. Now, something that I want to point out here is there is a 6th issue, and that 6th issue does have an epilogue. But the issue here is this epilogue leads directly into I Am Suicide. And so what we'll do is we're actually going to postpone that 6th issue. And when we get around to the I Am Suicide story arc, then we'll use that 6th issue to kind of jump off, because what it'll do is it'll allow us to link both this I Am Gotham story and the I Am Suicide story for the new readers who are coming along at that point in time. But for those of you guys who are just now jumping on board, who are just now catching up with my video on Batman I Am Gotham, we had talked about how in previous videos, Gotham City was met with two new superheroes calling themselves Gotham and Gotham Girl. Now, we didn't really know who these heroes were or where they came from. We know that Batman was trying to keep a plane from crashing into the river. He was doing the best he could to keep that from happening, but in the end, Gotham and Gotham Girl were the ones that basically saved the plane. And so from Bruce Wayne's perspective, he didn't initially trust them, but because their first impression on him was that they were acting as heroes, he decided to let them continue without challenging them and basically learn more about them. And this is what he did. He actually went to their home, and once he figured out who they were, and began digging into their history. And what he learned was that when Hank was a child, the name of the guy Gotham, Hank had basically encountered Batman when Hank and his parents were held at gunpoint by a robber in the same fashion that Bruce Wayne lost his parents. And seeing what was going on, Batman had intervened, and he had basically saved the life of Hank and his parents. But because of this, Hank had become obsessed with Batman. Now, something to point out here is that Bruce Wayne's interaction with Hank wasn't necessarily long. It was simply that Bruce had said that that what he was feeling at the moment was fear, and that it was okay to be scared because everybody gets scared. But the difference between being a hero and being a coward is that heroes deal with their fear. They come to grips with their fear. And so Bruce Wayne had basically inspired Hank, and Hank himself had recited this mantra over and over again that it's okay to be scared, but you should always face your fear, and had used this mantra to both inspire his sister Claire to join him on a journey of bettering themselves. And this was done in a multitude of different ways. Hank and Claire had, basically trained themselves in physical combat. Hank and Claire had expanded their minds when it came to forensic science. They had traveled the world to become volunteers in a multitude of different facets. They had basically undertaken the same kind of self-training regimen that Bruce Wayne had taken when he became Batman. And so the result was that during this time, they had reached out to their parents for a large sum of money, and for reasons unknown or through a means that we didn't fully understand or was never really explained to us, they emerged some months later with superpowers. Now, while we're still not told exactly where those powers came from in this issue, what we are told is exactly how it works. And what happened is that in the last issue, because of the fact that Gotham had been manipulated by Psycho Pirate, a villain that had the power to manipulate the emotions of people, Psycho Pirate had basically screwed with Gotham's mind and ended up putting him in a situation whereby he had an irrational hatred for Gotham. Gotham City. This was compounded by the fact that one of the soldiers that Gotham had killed had gone back to the home of Gotham and murdered his parents. And so because of these manipulations sort of fed in on themselves to where Gotham had a hatred of the city, and then he had a hatred of the people in the city because one of them killed his parents. He didn't realize that he was the cause of his own problem. And so the result here was that he began traveling back to Gotham City in order to lay waste to it. And Batman had intended to stop this, but because of the fact that Gotham had fought Batman directly, the Batmobile was destroyed and Bruce Wayne was left several miles outside of the city without an immediate means of return. And so what he does is he asks Alfred to basically intervene on his behalf to buy some time. Now, of course, Bruce Wayne doesn't actually expect Alfred to fight as Batman just because of the fact that Alfred does not have the combat skills to pull that off, but he is successful in buying time. He approaches Gotham and claims to be Batman, but because Gotham has various powers, he immediately sees this bluff. But in the time between when Alfred was bluffing and when Gotham calls it, Batman shows up. And so Alfred takes off and heads back to the Batcave, and Batman and Gotham end up in a battle that basically stretches across the city of Gotham. Now, Batman tries to reason with Hank here. He tries to talk him down, say, hey, look, man, you can't be tearing the city up. We can solve this emotional crisis that you're having. But Gotham is so entrenched in his anger and so entrenched in his rage that he just can't let it go. Now, during this time, because of the fact that Gotham had killed those soldiers, his sister Claire had basically watched the events unfold. Now, Tom King's not specific here. When Claire was found by Bruce Wayne, she was basically just kind of sitting in the corner in a fetal position, basically saying that she was scared. The reason why I say that Tom King isn't really clear on this is because we don't know if her fear was a byproduct of, Psycho-Pirate's manipulations, or if it was because Gotham was kind of her backbone. He was the guy, the brother that kept her grounded and kept her confident and strong. But the result is that while Gotham Girl was taken back to the Batcave and put under the care of both Duke Thomas and Alfred, she's watching the events unfold both on the news and through various, camera devices that Batman has around Gotham City. And so in the midst of this conflict, because Gotham City is being laid waste to in such a capacity, Duke tries to reason with her. Duke tries to talk to her, but she doesn't really want to do any of that. She doesn't really want to talk to anybody. And so what Batman says is, with everything being as chaotic as it is, because of the fact that he cannot handle Gotham on his own, he tells Alfred to get a hold of the Justice League. And that's exactly what happens. In the intervening moments when things are kind of going chaotic, when Batman's holding off Gotham as best as he can, the Justice League shows up here. Of course, we have the pre-New 52 Superman, we have Wonder Woman, we have Barry Allen, we have Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz, the Green Lanterns of Earth, and Cyborg and Aquaman. Now, what's really interesting about this situation is the Justice League is a formidable force in and of themselves. I mean, they're really the cream of the crop when it comes to DC's earthbound superhero team. And of course, with regards to Superman, sometimes Wonder Woman, and especially Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz, some heroes who operate beyond the planet Earth, or who have the potential to operate beyond the planet Earth. We would expect them to easily be able to subdue Gotham, but this is not the case. Gotham not only overpowers the Justice League, he overpowers Superman. Now, this is important because this is basically Tom King telling us how powerful Gotham is. In the New 52, the New 52 Superman that we saw when the, reboot first launched was weaker than his pre-New 52 counterpart. But when the New 52 Superman was killed and the pre-New 52 Superman took his place, we saw the stronger of the two Supermen emerging. This Superman that we see here is the pre-New 52 Superman. He's the strongest version of Superman, in the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths continuity. And Gotham is easily able to overpower him. Now, we didn't initially know what the basis behind this was, if it was simply because his powers were just that much more advanced, or if there was something else going on. But this explanation is given to us by virtue of Claire, of Gotham Girl herself. And what she says is that they basically bought their powers. Now, again, we're not given, an explanation on where these powers came from in the story or where they bought them from. We're simply just told that they bought them, and that the powers they bought were super strength, invulnerability, ultra vision, but the use of these powers and the limit of their powers was relative to their life. And what I mean here is they basically sacrificed years of their life for higher levels of power. And so there was no limit to how strong they could be. There was no limit to how strong Gotham Girl or Gotham could be. There was no limit to their invulnerability. There was no limit to, how well they could see, to their ultravision. But the higher they took their powers, the more years of their life they would lose. And so if they wanted to be an ordinary citizen, they could live for decades. If they wanted to be like Superman, they would have to sacrifice a few years of their life. But if they wanted to be godly in terms of powers, they would only have a few hours to live. And so what ended up happening here is Gotham has basically pushed his powers to the brink. He has pushed his powers to the extreme, to where they're at their highest levels, or seem to be of the highest levels that his life can withstand, to the point that he has maybe minutes, half an hour, something like that left to live. And so what Claire says is that because his power is so extreme, he seems effectively unstoppable, and there really doesn't seem to be a way to beat him, and his goal is to effectively destroy Gotham City. And so what Batman does is he steps up here and offers himself to Gotham, and saying that, that Psycho Pirate was allowed to, commit his acts because he hadn't been killed by Batman, that Gotham's parents were killed because Batman didn't get there in time. And so he's basically making himself the victim here. Batman would rather Gotham kill him than wipe out Gotham City. At the same time, we're given a little bit of a narrative between Claire and Duke. And Duke says that, Batman's mantra is always, it's okay to be afraid, but you have to face your fear. Now, this strikes a chord in Claire because from her perspective, this was not a quote that she heard from Batman, it was a quote she heard from her brother Hank. who of course got it from Batman. And so this is again basically, clearing up the discussion earlier about how we said where Tom King wasn't really clear about, Gotham Girl saying that she was scared. This seems to indicate that Gotham was kind of her backbone. He was her foundation for the confidence that she had. And the result was that this was rooted in the idea that Hank would constantly comfort her in saying it's okay to be afraid, but you have to face your fear. The result is that once she learns that this was basically Batman, that Batman was the one that had inspired her to become a superhero by virtue of inspiring Hank, she immediately takes off to confront her brother. And so for a fraction of a moment, in order to basically keep from killing herself, Gotham Girl puts her powers to the extreme, and in the process of doing so, ends up killing her brother. And that effectively wraps up the story. That sort of brings things to an end. To be honest with you guys, this story was kind of interesting to me. It really seemed like Tom King was using this as a platform to introduce a new superhero in the form of Gotham Girl. I enjoyed it for what it was. I felt like the conspiracy of the three Jokers really should have been the first story arc to kind of bring us in, but it also feels like that would be a trump card, just because that's the one thing that a lot of people are really looking forward to. A lot of people want to know about the history of the three Jokers, the conspiracy of the three Jokers, and maybe it would have been introducing that in the beginning would have just been too soon. Maybe it was something better suited for 2 or 3 story arcs down the line, which seems to be what DC is going for. All right, so continuing our discussions on DC Rebirth, we pick up now with I Am Suicide. I kind of miss the old intro. So what I want to do here is have a discussion about I Am Suicide. This is actually really cool. This story is, Tom King, dude, this guy's kind of crazy. With Vision, it was crazy good. With I Am Gotham, it wasn't really hitting the mark. With I Am Suicide, I'm impressed. I mean, this is a good story. This is a really, really solid story. And I think it really speaks volumes to the way that he uses characters, right? Because in comic books, there's all different kinds of characters out there, and a lot of people use them in a lot of different ways. But the mark of a really good storyteller is a person who can use a character in a way that was just never really used before, a way that we never really thought to use them before. And what I'm talking about here is actually the relationship between Psycho Pirate and Bane, and we'll actually get to that here in a minute. But what this does is this gives us a little bit of a rehash with regards to Bane's origin story in DC Rebirth. Now, I do have a video on the origin of Bane as part of DC Rebirth, and you guys are welcome to check that out. You'll find the link down in the description. But again, it really just kind of refreshes us that Bane basically spent a large majority of his life in Santa Prisca prison. He escaped for a while, but it also confirms the events of Nightfall in Batman's continuity. Now, this has been confirmed already. I mean, Bane had already reappeared. I think it was part of Batman Eternal. I know that was hushed, but I actually never really read through Batman Eternal. I'm just kind of going on some of the videos that I think Benny made. But with Batman's continuity, and I actually want to talk about this for a second because a lot of people have expressed confusion on where things stand. With Batman's continuity, it can be a bit confusing. So when the New 52 launched, because remember, the DC Rebirth event is basically still the New 52 continuity. When New 52 launched, Batman got, a retelling of his origin in the form of really, Batman Zero Year. But the question a lot of fans had is if, according to New 52, it's only been 5 years since superheroes first showed up on the scene, then what does that mean for Batman's history? What does it mean for events like Nightfall and events like Death in the Family and the Killing Joke and all that kind of stuff? And DC basically said, well, everything in the history of Batman happened in 5 years. And so it really, it strained credulity. DC Rebirth has actually come back and said, well, it's actually 10 years, not 5. But we still have yet to see how DC Rebirth will expand into the overall larger DC continuity and how it's all going to come together. So again, there's a lot of questions that exist there, and there's a lot of things that still need to be answered. But at the very least, again, this kind of reminds us that Bane is a guy that did fight Batman. He did break his back during Nightfall, and so the two of them do have history together. More so than that, Psycho Pirate is not just a villain. And that's why I say things are kind of cool here. Now, we don't know if this is Roger Hayden or if this is Charles Halstead. I think it is. I was actually talking to Sal and I was talking to Joel about this in the Weekly Pool chat because I was trying to figure it out. I was like, which one is it? Is it, DC's never really said. And it doesn't really matter in particular, I don't think. But historically speaking, the Psycho Pirate's always been a guy that had the ability to manipulate the emotions of others to basically make them feel certain emotions. So he can make a person feel fear, he can make them feel anger, happiness, sadness, so on and so forth. But he was always a guy that did this for, his own particular crimes, or maybe he would go against some super powerful being or something like that. In this story, Tom King basically turns him into a drug. And it's really, really cool because Bane is literally just kind of recounting, going back and more or less giving Psycho Pirate his backstory and talking about the pain pain and torment that he feels over the course of the failures that he's had in his life. You know, when he was basically forced to live in Santa Prisca because of his father's actions. You know, when he was forced to experience the death of his mother, when he had been defeated by Batman after defeating him. All these things, you know, all these experiences in his life has just kind of sent him into an emotional freefall. And so he basically uses Psycho Pirate to make him feel better. You know, he tells the Psycho Pirate, tell me that I'm happy, you know, tell me that I'm brave, tell me that I can always stop. And so instead of being addicted to like Venom, you know, the drug that basically gave him super strength and so on, it's really just him being addicted to the emotional feelings that Psycho Pirate can engender inside of him. Now from here, we pick up with Gotham Girl, because keep in mind, throughout most all of Tom King's run, following the events of I Am Gotham, where both Gotham and Gotham Girl were introduced as a brother and sister superhero duo, where Psycho Pirate had manipulated Gotham into basically losing his mind, becoming a bad guy, and then eventually it took the whole Bat family to kill him. You know, Gotham Girl was manipulated to feel extreme fear, and that's never really gone away. She's never really gotten over that. She's been able to temporarily get past it, but it was very much like Jessica Cruz. You know, when she was introduced, she was just always afraid. She'd be able to get over that fear, but it was only for a temporary amount of time. It's only now in Sam Humphrey's Green Lanterns that she's finally learning how to conquer her fear, especially after the events of Darkseid War, and she's able to actually become a Green Lantern and start creating constructs. With Gotham Girl, it's much the same way. The problem with this is that because the influence of Psycho Pirate is so strong, Bruce Wayne comes to the realization, he basically says, I've got to go, and I've got to find Psycho Pirate. I basically have to go to Santa Prisca, to the base of Bane, get Psycho Pirate and bring him back. The problem is Batman can't do that on his own. Between Bane, between Psycho Pirate, between all the soldiers that they have there, there's no way Batman will be able to pull this off by himself. And so what he needs is a team. Now, this is where things get cool, because the story kind of takes on this like Ocean's 11 kind of feel to it. Not in the sense of like, you know, the goofy or the jokey nature and like, you know, thieving and so on and so forth, but in the sense that Batman is effectively putting together a team. So it's like, you know, Batman's 4, I guess Batman's 11, that'd be a cool story. Like Bruce Wayne's 11, like I would read like Bruce Wayne's like, we're gonna go rob casinos in Las Vegas. I would love that. But the first person that he picks up traveling to Arkham Asylum is Ventriloquist. Now this guy, Arnold Wesker, is probably like, he's the queen on the chessboard. He's the most, I guess not really the most important, but the most powerful piece with regards to the plan that they're gonna have going on. And the reason why is going to become apparent as we get to the end of this. But Arnold Wesker is a guy that DC really toys with. The reason why the whole relationship between like Woody, the puppet, and the ventriloquist Arnold Wesker was so cool, and the reason why he's always been kind of a mainstay as a villain in DC's comics, is because of the fact that DC walked the line. We always kind of knew he had multiple personality, but there were some writers who wrote stories about him where there were times where it seemed like Woody was real, like the puppet was actually real, and Wesker was just doing what the puppet wanted him to do. You know, being able to give the puppet life really changed everything. And so because of that, it added a whole bunch of different effects. More so than this, some of the other people that he picks up, of course, is actually a girl named Jewel, a guy named Bronze Tiger, and then another guy named Punch. Now, of course, Bronze Tiger, a lot of people are pretty familiar with him. The story as it's given here is pretty self-explanatory. He more or less suffers from delusions of grandeur, but he's still a very capable fighter. Not only that, of course, Batman's like, look, you're a little faster than I am. I need you on my team for this mission that we're going to go on. But Jewel and Punch are actually a little more intriguing here. Of course, with Batman being accompanied by Commissioner Gordon, Jewel is a girl who's basically been stuck in a catatonic state. Now, the introduction of Jewel and Punch actually came out of the possible cancellation of the Joker, and a lot of people don't know that. Back in the 1960s, it was entirely possible that because Batman's comics just weren't selling and the Joker wasn't doing well because of the Comics Code, DC thought about like killing his character off. But what they needed was a more tamed down version, but still entertaining equivalent of the Joker. And so in 1967, I think it was a Captain Atom comic, they introduced Jewel and Punch. Now they were like the Joker Harley Quinn. They were like a one-two punch combo when it came to being silly and being nonsensical. Of course, it was like the Joker and Harley Quinn about 30 years before Harley Quinn. But the fact remains here that they were basically nonsensical. They were slapstick. Jewel has these jewels that allow her to use different abilities, energy projection, manipulating emotions, and so on. These guys have their own little gadgets, their own little tricks. But what we learn here is that with Jewel having been in a catatonic state, that Commissioner Gordon is not Commissioner Gordon. Instead, Commissioner Gordon is actually Punch. And what Punch had done is he had come to the realization that if Jewel was within Arkham Asylum, a time would come when Batman would basically go to see her for whatever reason, for information or something along those lines. And when that time came, he was basically going to be at his side, disguised as Commissioner Gordon. Now, of course, Bruce Wayne picks up on this almost immediately, but allowed it to go through. And the reason why was because he looked at Punch and said, it's astounding the lengths that you will go to to rescue this woman that you care so much about. You literally tricked the entirety of the Arkham staff. You broke into an insane asylum in order to rescue the woman that you love. And he says, I need a person that has skills like that. Now, the last person that we pick up with, and this is why when the story first launched, when I Am Suicide first launched, it was a huge deal because everyone thought this was the Joker. You know, the story initially started off, or I guess this conversation initially started off almost exactly like the Killing Joke. You know, I've been thinking lately about you and me. That's how the Killing Joke started off when Batman first encountered the Joker in the story, the conversation that they had. But as, you know, Batman's talking to this person and begins to undo the mask on their face, we learn that it's Catwoman. And the reason why she's here is because she killed 237 people and we don't know why. Now, of course, we actually figure that out, or at least we're told what it is here in a second. And the story behind this is actually really kind of cool. What Catwoman says, or at least, you know, the way it's given to us is kind of like in a letter that she wrote to Bruce Wayne as he's basically having all these guys, or at least he's invading Santa Prisca. It's really one of these situations where Catwoman compared herself to Bruce Wayne in a lot of different ways. That as a girl who was raised in an orphanage that was run by Thomas and Martha Wayne, she had seen, you know, the picture of Bruce and Thomas and Martha, and had always imagined herself being a part of them. And that was always really kind of a cool element of her character, is Catwoman always aspired for better, but always tried to achieve better in the worst way possible. But the kicker to all this is that she essentially says that her parents, you know, she never really knew them, you know, never really had a chance to meet with them. Instead, the orphanage, the fire that was caused, was by some crazy terrorist group, you know, and there were 237 of them. And so what she did is she started in Gotham City, and she literally went through and killed every last one of them. And then she expanded outside of Gotham City and eventually traveled the world, killing every single member of this terrorist group. You know, they committed their act and they had no reason, no motivation, there were no claims, no demands, no nothing. They just did it for the sole purpose of inspiring fear. Now, that's why she's in Arkham Asylum. And in fact, the next little bit of the story will really focus on Batman in terms of him originally catching her. That part's not extremely important. It is kind of interesting, but we're going to go ahead and actually leave that out of the story just because of the fact that it's not really a necessity for the main events that are going on here. But with Batman arriving at Santa Prisca, of course, it's one against 1,000. And despite how capable he is, I'm actually glad with what Tom King did here, because some writers may have been tempted. Some writers, you know, may have been like, yeah, of course, it's ridiculously impossible. But Batman was somehow able to defeat 500 soldiers, and it all happened off panel. Tom King's like, no, that's stupid. Like that, it'd be cool to see, but there's no way. Even the most staunch of Batman fans would just be like, I mean, I don't know about that, man. Like, I mean, I love Batman, but he's not going to defeat 500 people with automatic machine guns. It's not going to happen. And so, of course, Batman is effectively taken prisoner. Now, he's brought before Bane himself, and the kicker about all this is, remember, Bane is not using Venom right now, so he's not using the substance that allows him to take on this extreme strength. And in fact, during his conversation with Bruce Wayne and with Batman, he basically tells him this. He's like, I'm not using Venom right now, so I can't defeat you as easily as I did the first time we met when I broke your back in Gotham City. But he says I could still break your back. And that's exactly what he does. He breaks Batman's back. And so what he does is he basically takes him, drags him down to the same prison cell that Bane himself had spent so much time in, and then just kind of leaves Batman there. Now, of course, Batman is able to make his escape, you know, the comic being what it is. Batman is able to get out, but once he does, we basically learn that, you know, Selina Kyle, the Catwoman, had come along as part of this plan, and that she had personally brought the ventriloquist. The point of Batman even being caught in the first place was to basically be thrown in a prison cell and then allow, you know, himself to basically open a back door for Catwoman and the ventriloquist to get in, because in his mind, he knew that as intelligent as Bane is, you know, in Bane's mind, Batman can't escape. If Batman's back is broken, he's not going to be able to get out. And so if he's being held prisoner, there's really nothing Bruce Wayne can do. And so he can effectively just kind of throw him in there and call it a day. Now, at this point, we switch over to the conversation that these guys are having here. And again, this is really kind of cool, because what this does is it actually allows Selina Kyle and it allows ventriloquist to have this interesting conversation, because it really did beg the question, you know, who is this in control when it comes to the ventriloquist? Is it multiple personality, or is it the idea that the ventriloquist himself is really being subjected to the control of a puppet? And of course, during the conversations between the two, Selina Kyle begins asking things. She's like, you know, is it really just the puppet, or is it you? You know, and in the mind of the ventriloquist, he's like, no, it's not just me. The puppet really does have control. You know, that's really the monster. He's really the one making me do these things. Now, for Selina Kyle, this is kind of cool, you know, because she's like, basically, this guy's gotten out. He can plead insanity every single time because, you know, to anybody looking at him for what it is, he's got multiple personalities. I mean, you know, the ventriloquist is just a personality, a counterpart to him. Now, the reason for this is because back in the early days of Arnold Wesker's life, he was really timid, he was really very meek. He was, for all intents and purposes, a coward. He was scared of everything. He was always running and hiding from all of his different problems and things like that. But eventually his parents were killed. And in the emotional turmoil, really, that came out of this experience, he basically ended up developing a second personality that didn't manifest until he came in contact with a guy named Donegan, I think it was. And this guy Donegan literally had a dummy named Woody. And the dummy began talking to Arnold Wesker and eventually helped him to escape. And the two of them just kind of went on a crime spree. But the fact remains here that by his very nature, by his very definition, Arnold Wesker is a guy who just does what he's told. He doesn't have any initiative. He has no drive, no ambition. You'd never get anything beyond what you tell him to do. He's very much robotic in that sense. And so because of that, Selina Kyle basically says, yeah, I know Batman told us that you're supposed to stay with me, but what I'm telling you is stay here. And so the initial indication here that Tom King is giving us is that she's breaking out of the plan that Batman set for them. Now, of course, from here, we pick up with the other half of the plan in the sense that Bronze Tiger and Punch and Jewel had basically approached Santa Prisca Prison with the idea that Bronze Tiger himself was bringing Punch directly to Bane. Now, the reason for this is because Punch was like one of the only guys, I think the only guy, who was able to successfully break out of Santa Prisca Prison. And so because of this, it's very much sought after to essentially have him return home, if for no other reason than the fact that Bane's just collecting trophies. The kicker to all this is that, while this conversation is taking place, Batman's watching it all unfold from a ventilation shaft. Selina Kyle jumps in, and she basically takes out Bronze Tiger, and then she spills the beans of the whole plan to Bane, and basically says the whole reason why these guys are here is a ruse. They're supposed to be a distraction. I'm supposed to kidnap Psycho Pirate. Batman's gonna jump back in. He's gonna fight you, and while all that's going on, I'll make off with Psycho Pirate, and we'll get him back to Gotham City, and then everybody's just gonna leave. Maybe they'll die, maybe they won't, but that's the intentional plan, is for everybody to make it out. In the middle of all this, we have what looks like Selina Kyle killing Jewel, and then turning around and killing Punch. And so it's like, okay, this is really the worst case scenario right here. Catwoman just destroying the entire plan that Batman had laid down. Now, when I was going through this, I was just kind of like, holy cow, like this is extremely bad, because what this basically means is that they're all most likely going to die at the hands of Bane. And so with Batman more or less being held prisoner here, or at the very least, kind of forced to submit to a degree, it's the idea that they're effectively going to take him out. Like they're going to do him in. It seems like it's the end of the road for Bruce Wayne. Now, at this point, we have people who were just kind of spread out in different locations. And so what's going on here, and it actually took a minute for this to kind of sink in. What's going on here is the equivalent of a chess game. Anybody who plays chess knows the worst thing you could do is bunch your players up. More so than that, you should always have your pieces strategically placed in different locations, because the best way to checkmate a player is to checkmate them at a distance, but to also effectively box them into a corner, box them against their own pieces. That's one of the best ways to win. Because of this, think of these guys as chess pieces. We have Bronze Tiger, who's basically been thrown down, in the pit with all the other soldiers and killers for hire under Bane's control. We have Arnold Wesker, who's still just kind of sitting down in the sewers, waiting for someone to come and tell him what to do. Jewel and Punch are dead. They're being sent off to the furnaces, and Catwoman is sitting alongside Bane while Batman begins to fight him. Now, the other half of this is that Bane is very much taunting Batman in this skirmish. Bane is very much basically saying, you and I are exactly the same in a lot of different ways. Now, the argument Bane makes here is good, and it's very easy to discount this, but the argument that he makes is actually pretty legitimate here, and the reason why is Bane is extremely intelligent. I mean, Bane, what we saw in The Dark Knight Returns, in terms of his strength, that was pretty cool, but in terms of his intelligence, it was nowhere near what he needed to be. At the end of the movie, he was still basically just a henchman. He was working for Talia al Ghul. Spoiler alert for a 7-year-old movie. For the comics, Bane was always wildly intelligent. He educated himself. He was able to deduce Batman's identity in somewhere between 3 to 6 months, I think it was. He's one of the smartest guys when it comes to combat, strategy, so on and so forth. And what he tells Batman is, look, over the course of my life, I thought Venom was the answer. I thought that having this substance that would grant me super strength would allow me to achieve what it is that would make this pain go away. That would make me feel like a better person, because I felt like I could do anything. But he said that's not the answer. The answer is actually Psycho Pirate. Psycho Pirate will make you feel better. All you have to do is tell him that you want to be happy. All you have to do is tell him that you want to be brave. All you have to do is tell him that you can always stop. And so he tells Batman, tell me this. Tell Psycho Pirate this. Batman responds by saying, all I want to do is I want to break your back. And that's when all the chess pieces start moving around. We learn that Jewel and Punch are not dead. They're very much alive. The Bronze Tiger is feeding for Venom, him, and he basically starts attacking all these different guys. Bronze Tiger then turns around and begins making his way back up to where Batman is. Punch and Jewel are basically using their tricks and so on and so forth to basically create air bubbles using gum so they can, jump out of the furnace, they can jump into the water, come back up to the surface without having to worry about drowning by simply breathing in the oxygen that they have in there. Now, of course, this stretches the limits of credulity, but at the very least, it makes for an interesting story. Finally, we basically pick up with all these different guys moving in the direction of Arnold Wesker, and we have Bronze Tiger finally taking Wesker and bringing him to where Batman's located. On top of all this, the plan seems to have been this the entire time. Batman seems to have orchestrated this the whole time because Catwoman keeps saying, do you want me to get involved? Do you want me to get involved? And then finally Batman says, break him, and Catwoman jumps in and breaks Bane's back. And so again, it seems to be the entire plan of Batman to basically not only defeat Bane, or I guess not only take Psycho Pirate, but to crush Bane, to basically say, at the end of the day, you're nowhere near where I'm at. Who you are right now is a shadow of your former self. Now, a lot of the success still hinges on Arnold Wesker, and the reason why is because, again, Psycho Pirate can manipulate the emotions of anyone who sees him. And so because of this, if he looks at Batman, if he looks at, any of these guys and targets them, he'll send them into states of absolute insanity by manipulating their emotions. But with Arnold Wesker, it's not that way, because Arnold Wesker is emotionally repressed. He doesn't allow his emotions to get out there. He's just a robot. He just does what he's told to do. And so because of this, in the middle of Psycho Pirate more or less taunting Wesker, we suddenly have the personality of Woody the puppet emerging in the form of a talking hand. And then this is really just Arnold Wesker's defense, his own consciousness coming out and basically saying, no one can control me. The only person that can control Arnold Wesker is, of course, Woody. No one controls the ventriloquist. And so, of course, because of this, Psycho Pirate's taken out, which leads to Bronze Tiger taking out Arnold Wesker to make sure that he can't become, too wildly dangerous. But again, this just kind of allows the story to come to its organic end, with Batman taunting Bane one last time by basically saying, a time's going to come when you're going to want revenge, when you're going to want to come after me. And when that time comes, don't, because you're going to get more of the same. And so what this story does is it concludes with the various guards of Bane, coming running in to his aid. And the one thing he keeps calling for is venom. And so the indication here is that Bane is going to go back to being the same Bane he used to be, where he was all juiced up and he was like 3 times the normal size of a human being, and he was breaking Batman's back. So Tom King's Batman I Am Bane is an incredibly well-written story, and in truth, it's one of my absolute favorites. The reason why is because of the fact that Tom King has a lot of similarities to Scott Snyder, but he's basically making Batman his own, and the story is really just kind of like this multifaceted thing. I mean, for the first 20 issues of Batman Rebirth, it's all about really bookending into his battle with Bane, wrapping things up and then setting the stage for the Button storyline, of course, when we basically deal with the idea of the Watchmen in the DC universe. But the cool thing about this is that, again, much like Scott Snyder, it's all-encompassing. When Scott Snyder first took over Batman with the New 52, what he basically did is, of course, he gave us like Court of Owls, for example. For issues 1 through 12, it was Court of Owls and City of Owls, but the entire 12-issue run is largely just kind of called the Court of Owls storyline. But it was a multifaceted story that basically revealed to us as the reader that there was an organization operating in Gotham City that Batman never knew about called the Court of Owls, and it was cool to turn the Batman mythos on its head, where we previously assumed that Batman always knew what was going on in Gotham, that in truth, he didn't know everything. From there, it was the return of the Joker, death of the family, Endgame. There were multifaceted story arcs that helped to kind of revamp and revitalize the Batman mythos for a new generation of readers. And that's one of the reasons why so many people look to Scott Snyder's run and say Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo had the definitive storytelling standard when it came to the Batman landscape. And so when Tom King took over, it was a tough nut to crack. I mean, it was a tough sell for a lot of people to say, can Tom King live up to Scott Snyder's run? In my mind, the answer is yes. And the reason why is because the whole first 20 issues of Batman is really kind of like this self-contained story that you have to read in its entirety in order to fully appreciate it. And so what this video is going to do is it's going to harken back all the way to really the very first story of Batman Rebirth, the very first issue of Batman Rebirth, and kind of give us an idea of everything that was going on behind the scenes with regards to Batman's final confrontation with Bane. Now, what this does is this picks up with the aftermath of I Am Suicide. There were a couple of one-shots between I Am Suicide and I Am Bane, but they weren't wildly necessary. They were just kind of setting the stage and showing a little bit of romance between Batman and Catwoman, and they were cool for what they were, but they're by no means essential. However, the goal of Batman was to basically capture Psycho Pirate. Pirate. Now remember, Psycho Pirate is a guy who can basically put on his mask and then manipulate the emotions of other people, sending them into a state of either total insanity, of complete happiness, literally making them feel whatever it is that he wants them to feel. With Psycho Pirate impacting Gotham Girl, who of course we had talked about in the story I Am Gotham, with her having really powers that were almost on par with Superman, the idea was to basically have her alongside Gotham turn against Batman and send Gotham City into a state of complete and total chaos. The idea was that ultimately Gotham was killed and Gotham Girl was taken by Batman for the purpose of trying to restore her back to her normal mental state instead of just being in complete and total fear all the time. And so because of this, with Batman basically, in the events of I Am Suicide capturing Psycho Pirate, what he did is he literally invaded the island of Bane, Santa Prisca prison, and then took Psycho Pirate away from him. Now, the reason why this is so significant is because with this story picking up, of course, it really has Batman engaging with Bronze Tiger. Now, on the surface, it seems as though Bronze Tiger's kind of coming out of nowhere, but this is really a ruse that's been set up by both Batman and Bronze Tiger. And the reason why is because this is designed for the purpose of basically capturing Psycho Pirate and then bringing him into contact with Gotham Girl in order to restore her mental state back to where it's supposed to be. Now, we'll see that come to its fruition. We'll see that fleshed out here in a little while, but what we end up doing is we actually switch over to Batburger, and this is a really cool point in the story. This is kind of funny, and the reason why is because of the fact we've got Bruce Wayne alongside Duke Thomas, and the guy who's serving their food, he's asking do you want to jokerize your fries and different things like that. I'd love to go to a restaurant where I can jokerize my fries. That would be amazing. It's almost like In-N-Out monster, animal style. Oh my God, by the way, In-N-Out animal style fries are amazing, dude. They're so good. I didn't believe it before, but they are incredibly delicious. But this is really actually a meeting taking place between the Bat family. So it will really minus Barbara Gordon or Batwoman. So it's basically Duke Thomas and it's Bruce Wayne and then Jason Todd, Damian Wayne, and Dick Grayson. But the funny thing is we get this really cool interaction between them. For example, Damian Wayne basically gets a kid's meal, and then when he opens it up, it turns out to be a Red Hood toy, and then he's all kind of, all upset about it and everything. But it's still kind of funny. And the reason why this works is because, again, and I keep reiterating this, with Damian Wayne, he's one of my favorite characters because he's so young and he's so ruthless, but he's also still a kid, and so he enjoys kids' stuff. But again, what's basically happening here is Bruce Wayne's essentially telling everybody, look, I'm going to have to take Gotham Girl for 5 days. I'm going to take her and I'm going to have Psycho Pirate. He's going to interact with her for 5 days. Bane is going to come looking for her. For 5 days, you all need to leave Gotham City. You all have to get out of here. And the reason why is because Bane will destroy anybody in his path in order to get to the Psycho Pirate. Now, the reason why this is the case, and the reason why Bane captured Psycho Pirate in the first place was because Bane is not using Venom anymore, or at least was not using Venom at the time, the serum that gives him his enhanced strength and durability and all that kind of good stuff. But coming off of Venom is very much like coming off of a drug. There are withdrawals. In this case, with Venom, it's almost like the body's on fire. And so in order for Bane to basically overcome the impact of Venom without him being on it, he uses Psycho Pirate to manipulate his emotions so his body doesn't feel as crushing as it would if he didn't have the Psycho Pirate. And so literally taking Psycho Pirate away from Bane is taking away the one thing that's keeping his sanity intact, the one thing that's keeping his body from feeling like it's destroying itself. And so because of this, again, Bruce Wayne basically says, they're going to come after me. Bane is going to come after me, and he's going to come after you if you're around here. He's going to use everybody that he can in order to force my hand and require me to give up Psycho Pirate. Now, this is the other cool thing, because remember, Duke Thomas is still relatively new to the idea of what it means to be a sidekick or a trainee of Batman. Of course, we know his role is different from Damian or Dick Grayson. He's not a Robin per se, but he does have history with Batman, with the I Am Robin storyline, or I guess We Are Robin storyline, and all these different little events, but he doesn't nearly have the experience of Damian, Jason Todd, Dick Grayson, any of those guys. And so in Duke's mind, he's still very loyal to Batman and hasn't quite grasped the idea yet that when you're a Robin, your number one responsibility is to defy Batman. And so because of that, you basically have Damian, Dick Grayson, and Jason Todd, who essentially race off to go against Bane, to try to find a way to defeat Bane, to make sure that he can't harm Batman. Now, at this point, we follow Bruce with Selina Kyle. And again, there's a lot of things that happen off panel here that we'll find out later on down the line, but this really seemed to be a little segment that came out of nowhere, in the sense that there's some flirting between the two, but we don't really know everything that goes on. We just simply know that for whatever reason, Tom King is throwing it in here. And this is one of the instances that I've been talking about when I've been saying, there we go, I can't talk shock that Tom King's Batman has been hit and miss for a lot of people, because there are things that have been thrown into the story that seem totally irrelevant. You know, the couple one-shots that we had with Batman and Catwoman where they were on a rooftop, you know, doing their own thing. You know, these instances here, they seem to come out of left field. They seem to have no place in the overarching story. But what we're going to find out is that they actually do. It's just Tom King has kind of been, you know, working off panel. And so what we end up doing, you know, as we transition back over to Wayne Manor alongside Alfred, Bruce Wayne, and Gotham Girl, is that once they get in the Batcave for the purpose of transferring her over to Arkham without anybody realizing what's going on, when they get into the cave, they find the hung bodies of Damian Wayne, Jason Todd, and Dick Grayson. Now, what this shows us is exactly what we would expect, that these three guys do not stand a chance against Bane. Not only that, in this story, we're going to see Bane at his absolute most ruthless. And the reason being because of the fact that Bane is basically a desperate man in this situation. He's really like a rabid animal in this particular story. And it's one of the things that make him so cool. Of course, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but it's almost like a combination of like Tom Hardy's Bane from The Dark Knight Returns combined with Bane as we traditionally know him in comic book form. And it actually makes for a wicked combination. It is really, really cool. But from here, you know, of course, switching over to Bronze Tiger, essentially, of course, he kind of answers the door out of nowhere while he's still going, you know, coming off the withdrawals of Venom, only to be shot in the stomach. And so at this point, we pick up with Superman's Fortress of Solitude. And of course, we basically have Damian, Jason, and Dick Grayson being held in stasis by Batman in the Fortress of Solitude, with Superman protecting them. Now, this raises a very interesting question right off the bat when I first saw this, is why doesn't Batman ask Superman for aid? In fact, why doesn't Batman ask the Justice League for aid? And he has. But the idea behind this, and really the overarching theme behind DC Rebirth, is to have a tighter knit continuity among the various characters and stories that have been going on. That was one of the biggest issues of DCU, is you would have virtually no continuity. Batman's the god of knowledge in the Justice League, while he's not Batman in his own story because he's just kind of MIA. And so that lack of continuity threw people off. With DC Rebirth, continuity is the name of the game. DC is very much taking a page out of Valiant Comics with how hardcore their continuity has to be. And so because of that, you know, we have Batman speaking with Superman. The other half of this, though, is that if Superman were to get involved, there would be no conflict. Superman would just pummel Bane and then take him prisoner, and that would be the end of that. There would be no, you know, possibility of Batman's defeat. There would be no question of what happens next, you know, none of that stuff. It would take away from the suspense of the story. Not only that, I just want to see Batman fight Bane. And so because of that, what we end up doing is we basically have Batman telling Superman, look, I just need you to keep these guys protected. Now, of course, Superman doesn't have to be in the Fortress of Solitude. Remember, it's Superman, superheroing the whole 9 yards, much like his, you know, connection with Lois Lane here now. If somebody were to break into the Fortress of Solitude, Superman would know and he would be there in an instant. And so again, it's almost like a security system of sorts in terms of Superman's powers. But switching back over to Arkham Asylum, this is when we basically have Alfred dressed as Dr. Arkham alongside Gotham Girl, who's disguised as Hush, Thomas Elliot, you know, Batman's childhood friend who, you know, eventually became an enemy, when they basically make their way into to a cell where Psycho Pirate's being held. And the idea here is for Psycho Pirate to basically use his ability, you know, use his mask to begin restoring the mind of Gotham Girl. Now, this is one of the reasons why this is so cool, is because Psycho Pirate spent a prolonged amount of time with Gotham Girl manipulating her mind, but it wasn't 5 days. You know, manipulating her emotions didn't take a full 5 days. But in this instance, it will take that to undo the damage. And the reason why is because of the fact that not only is fear really one of the most potent emotions when it comes to DC Comics, we know that with regards to the Sinestro Corps, the Green Lantern mythos, the emotional spectrum, but also because of the fact that Gotham Girl has been dealing with this altered emotional state for quite some time. And so the damage is pretty intense. And so the Psycho Pirate is going to have to basically blast her with the full potency of his abilities in order to basically restore her mind back to where it needs to be. And of course, this basically picks up with him telling her, you know, you're brave, you're very, very brave, and that kind of thing. Now, transitioning over to really to what I consider to be the kind of highlight of this conflict, we basically have, you know, a few of Bane's henchmen who are traveling around and rounding up individuals who were either part of Batman's team when they first broke into Santa Prisca prison and stole Psycho Pirate, or individuals who were just close to Batman. So like Commissioner Gordon, Catwoman, Bronze Tiger, who was shot and has basically been taken prisoner. But what ends up happening here is Batman's effectively just kind of perched up on the Arkham Asylum clock tower. And then Bane just pops a flare and reveals that he has Catwoman, Bronze Tiger, Duke Thomas, and Commissioner Gordon held hostage. Now, this is where the story gets really, really cool. And that's one of the things about this is Tom Taylor, when it comes to like setting up a story, he does it pretty well, but it seems to kind of drag on a little bit. And so what this ends up doing is just kind of going from 0 to 60 really fast. Now, one of the most important things that he does is he juxtaposes the history of Batman and Bane together. And this is what's so cool because no one's ever really done this before. Usually what they do is they say, hey, here's like the origin story of Bane, and it's like a one shot or something like that, or it's somehow intertwined into the story. But we don't see Batman's origin and Bane's origin side by side with one another. And the cool thing about this is that Tom King doesn't really change anything. I mean, he doesn't like retcon the origin of Bane in order to make it fit the story. He just takes the origin of Bane as it exists in DC Comics and then puts it side by side with the origin of Batman as it exists in DC Comics. And what we find out is these two are almost identical. And that's the coolest thing about this. At a young age, they both lost their parents. Of course, Bane had lost his mother, but the motivation behind them becoming who they were is rooted in the loss of their parents. They both are motivated to become better people. They struggle with their surroundings. But when it comes to the idea of where they end up branching off, this comes in the form of the fact that when they basically undergo the process of improving themselves, they enhance their minds, they enhance their physical bodies. But where Batman looks to his experience and says, I am going to train myself to become someone more capable. I'm going to train myself to basically wage a war on crime. Bane's idea is that he's going to conquer crime. He's going to conquer anybody out there who could pose a legitimate threat, just for Bane to do nothing more than establish his dominance as a person in the world out there. And so again, that's where really their roads kind of started to fork off. But even then, they're not that dissimilar. At that point, it really just kind of comes down to semantics. When it's Batman waging a war on crime, he might as well be conquering criminals. When it comes to, Bane conquering criminals, he might as well be waging a war on crime. The only difference is the end result. Where Batman looks to criminals and says they can be rehabilitated, Bane says, you now work for me. And so that's one of the cool things. It's really one of these awesome juxtapositions between these two characters in terms of how similar they are. Now, the other half of what goes on here is actually just a direct fight between Batman and Bane. And Bane pulls no punches. I mean, he absolutely wrecks Batman. And it's one of the coolest things here because Bane goes on this tirade. He basically says, I'm not a joke. I'm not a riddle. I'm not a bird or a cat or a penguin. I'm not any of your foes out there. I'm not some butler tending to your wounds and telling you everything's going to be okay. I'm not some sidekick that's there to have your back when things go under. I'm not some weakling. I'm not some rich kid that's basically trying to save the world. I am Bane. And that's the coolest thing about this is because it's Tom King basically saying, this is the Bane you know and love. This is the Bane you want. You don't want the Bane that's kind of coming off Venom. People don't want the Bane that's just kind of, has enhanced strength to a degree. People want like the Bane who broke the bat. They want Nightfall Bane. And that's the coolest thing. That's one of the reasons why I love this so much. That's why I think Batman Rebirth is the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now, just because of the fact that we get this awesome, amazing segment between these two characters who historically have had so much history between one another. Now, what ends up happening here is that because of the fact this is taking place over the course of 3 or 4 days, that Batman's basically kind of left unconscious, and that's it. Bane tells his guys, kill everybody. So, Commissioner Gordon, Duke Thomas, kill them all. Well, then of course we end up finding out that what was happening off panel with these different encounters between Catwoman and Batman was that they were setting this up, that Batman knew Bane would come for Catwoman. It's one of the reasons why he kept her there, simply because of the fact that Catwoman knows that she's very capable when it comes to escaping her confines, when it comes to her agility, so on and so forth. She's really the one person in Batman's corner who's almost guaranteed to make an escape if she's captured by Bane. And so because of this, what she did is she freed Duke Thomas, Commissioner Gordon, she freed all those guys, Bronze Tiger, and then took Bane's guys hostage. And so what this does is it thins the playing field. What it does is it basically sort of puts everything on the side of Batman, with Bane really having no allies left on his side. Now, of course, the conflict ends up leading directly to Arkham Asylum itself. And this, I think, is really where the story begins to reach its climax. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that with Bane entering into Arkham, we get this this really cool segment from Maximilian Zeus. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Maximilian Zeus is basically just a crazy guy, but he has these amazing monologues. He has like some of the best monologues in DC Comics because he runs off like all these historical lines and stuff like that. But in this one, he's actually running off a segment from, I want to say, the Inferno aspect of Dante's Divine Comedy. But it basically ends with, you know, all hope abandoned, ye who enter here. And so it's really just like anybody who comes in here is going to get decimated by Bane. The reason why we know this and the reason why Zeus is even free in the first place is because in order for Batman to buy time, he freed all the criminals in Arkham Asylum. And so it's basically Bane against everyone. And it's like the coolest thing ever. It's one of the coolest things because Two-Face is the first one to encounter him, right? You know, and Two-Face says, look, we're of two minds. You know, the rational side of me says, Batman said that he would basically improve my sentence if I stopped you, but then his chaotic and his dark side says, but if you have something better to offer, let me know and I'll take your side. Bane punches him, knocks him out, and says, I offer pain. That's what I offer. I offer pain to those who get in my way. And that's exactly what he does. I mean, that's, God, man, fanboy. That's why this is so cool, is because Bane is just a force of nature right now. I mean, Solomon Grundy, not a chance. Amygdala, not a chance. These are two powerhouses in DC Comics, two individuals with insane levels of strength, and Bane takes them both out because remember, Venom enhances his strength and he just starts pumping that juice, and that's the end of them. One of the other cool things that we get too is we have like Solomon Grundy, you know, I'm Solomon Grundy, he starts running off the Born on a Monday thing, you know, Amygdala's like, I'm Amygdala, so on and so forth. Bane says, I am torment, I am ruin, I am plague, I am venom. And that's what's so cool about this, is because it's just, God, I love seeing this version of Bane. It's so awesome because that's one of the things that we've always wanted to see, right? I mean, Bane has always been like a thinking man's villain. I mean, he's always been extremely strong, extremely durable, but one of the greatest aspects of Christopher Nolan's version of Tom Hardy's Bane in The Dark Knight Returns is just how insanely powerful he was. I mean, just his sheer force of strength was the ability for him to just overcome Batman, and there was no fight. I mean, you guys know just as well as I do, the first fight between Batman and Bane, that wasn't a fight, that was a murdering, and it was the coolest thing to see because it was just Batman getting completely dominated because he was not prepared. What we get in this is still the thinking man's Bane, the one that we know from Nightfall. We get the smart Bane, the educated Bane, the Bane who's wildly intelligent and uses that to his own ends. But because of the fact that he's desperate to regain the Psycho Pirate, he's now fallen down into this path of being intelligent, but also being a man filled with nothing but rage. And so because of this, he starts taking to everyone. And that's what makes this so interesting. Now, switching back over to Bruce Wayne, of course, it's kind of crazy because Bruce is talking with Alfred, and Alfred's like, dude, why did you free all those villains? And Batman's response is, well, we're just kind of buying time. Now, in truth, this was a really smart move by Batman. I mean, when Bruce Wayne knows right off the bat, these villains are not going to stand a chance against Bane, right? I mean, they're not going to be able to hold him down. I mean, as long as he has that juice pumping, he's going to be an unstoppable force. But it's not the idea to stop Bane. The purpose is to basically have a stopgap measure. It's to basically slow Bane down in order for Bruce Wayne to recover, even if only temporarily, to basically kind of regain his mind, to bring himself back together, and then to fight off Bane again. And so again, you know, with Bane continuing on, it's Mr. Freeze gets taken out, Firefly gets taken out. It's one villain after another. Man-Bat, Victor Zsasz, the Mad Hatter, all these guys keep getting crushed. You know, Copperhead, no one is able to stop him. No one's able to keep Batman from pulling off what he needs to pull off. Now, what Tom King also does here is he begins the process of setting up the war of jokes and riddles for the larger Batman mythos. Of course, it's really small here. It's basically Bane taking Riddler and having Riddler put his mind to task with cracking this massive door where Psycho Pirate is supposed to be held captive. But what Riddler also says is once the door is open and Bane makes his way in, he simply just kind of runs it off. It's a quick little line, it's not too huge, but he says, tell Batman I still remember the war of jokes and riddles. I still remember what he made me do, and you guys know just as well as I do that he deserves this. And so again, what this does is lead up into this sort of final conflict between Batman and Bane. And again, that's why all this makes sense, is because with this story, Batman basically ponders his own death. Issue number 1, when he first encountered Gotham and Gotham Girl, you know, when this plane was about to crash, into the Gotham Harbor, when these two people showed up seemingly out of nowhere with enhanced strength and durability and the power to fly, basically all the same abilities as Superman, Batman looked at them and said, that's my way out. And that's why Gotham and Gotham Girl were so significant. And that's why Batman is, at least it seems to be, going to the lengths to basically to restore Gotham Girl back to the way she was before. Because in that story, Tom King basically said the one thing that we've known for years and years and years and years, and all the time that we've been reading Batman. Bruce Wayne does not want to be Batman forever. Eventually, he wants to walk away. He wants to retire. That's the basis behind why Duke Thomas is here, and it's the basis for why he paid special attention to Gotham and Gotham Girl, because if he trained them adequately, they could be the first in a new generation of heroes who could protect Gotham City the way it needs to be protected, with Batman finally relinquishing control and stepping out of the shadows and allowing himself to live a normal life, or at least a life as normal as he could live. And so because of this, it's basically Batman kind of looking on at this idea that everywhere he goes, destruction, death, and failing is not far behind. But if it means that he can defeat Bane, if it means that he can restore the mind of Gotham Girl, then it was all worth something. At the same time, again, he continues to ponder his death. He tells Bane, you have any idea how many times I've been told, I'm gonna kill you, you're gonna die tonight. I've been told that every single night since I've become Batman. It's wearing thin, it's getting old. But what he also reveals here is that all of this was done for the purpose of buying time. When he first came up with the idea of taking Psycho Pirate from Bane, he knew that there was going to be fallout. He knew that there was going to be consequence. All this stems with the end of the I Am Gotham storyline. As soon as Gotham Girl's mind had basically been warped by Psycho Pirate, Batman said, we have to get Psycho Pirate back. Psycho Pirate is a source for Bane in order to allow Bane to overcome his addiction to Venom. Because of that, Bane is going to be a wrecking machine as soon as we take Psycho Pirate. All these fights, all these conflicts, everything that's happened in the story so far is just for the purpose of buying time. But it's also bringing to an end this massive battle between the two. Now, the other cool thing about this is that Batman recollects on his own history. He looks back at his own past and really begins to realize how similar he is to Bane, but their roads led them down two different paths. And that's really what Tom Taylor's hitting home here. When it comes to the characters of Bane and Batman, yes, they're very similar. Yes, their origins are almost entirely identical. The difference is that Batman is ruled by his past and Bane is not. Now, that's kind of crazy because we would expect it to be the other way around, because what this does is it basically forces Batman into the situation where he's governed by his own destiny. He doesn't control his own destiny, he's controlled by it. Batman is ruled by fear. Batman's ruled by fear of the fact that somebody else out there will experience the same situation he experienced with his parents. Now, that gives him strength to do what he does every day, but instead of him controlling his own life, controlling his own destiny, he's governed by it. His road was set the instant that his parents died. Now, with Bane, it's not necessarily the case. Bane chose his path. Bane chose to go onto the road of becoming a bad guy, chose to go on the road of becoming a villain. But then that asks the question, what would have happened if he had chosen a different path? What would have happened if he had chosen the same road as Batman, where he decided to wage a war on crime? What would have happened if the two of them had come together as allies? What kind of work could be done in Gotham City if they both function together? And so that's why this story is so cool, is because it begs those questions. But in the end, of course, Batman, as Bane continues saying, I am Bane, Batman's response is, yeah, I know I've heard it before, but I'm Batman, and just headbutts the hell out of Bane and essentially knocks him unconscious. And so what this does is it basically brings an end to the battle between these two. There's something to be said about the conflict here, because it's really kind of like this final battle, almost indicative of, the Batman versus Joker in Scott Snyder's Endgame. And that's one of the reasons why I say, Tom King is very similar in terms of how he's more or less mirroring Scott Snyder's Batman in terms of how he adds in Bane, but it's still its own style of storytelling. And so it's really kind of cool. It's one of those cool situations where they do stand side by side, but they are still different at the same time. But what this does is it really kind of has Batman sort of having this imaginary conversation with his mother, who's now deceased. And the idea is, it's really him coming to grips with her death in a lot of ways, where he basically says, look, all this has been about is saving Gotham Girl, is keeping this girl's life intact, is giving this girl a chance to live a normal life. And of course, it really sort of ends with his mother telling him, look, you don't have to die in some grandiose way to make me proud. Everything you've done has made me proud. The fact that you've lived up to our legacy, done the best you could for Gotham City, both financially as Bruce Wayne, as well as Batman in terms of your war on crime. And so again, it's really just kind of him coming to grips with his own history, coming to grips with his own life. But again, it's really kind of one of these interesting things. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like this story, is because it basically just sort of wraps up everything that's happened in the last 20 issues, and then it sets the stage for the next phase of Tom King's run, which will focus on, the whole Button story arc, the idea of the Watchmen being in the DC universe. Oh my God, Rob Core. Okay, so check this out. This story is called The Brave and the Mold. Like, if that gives you any indication of what it's about, and I swear to God, this story is hilarious. It's like the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now. Like, it's absolutely one of my favorite stories with Batman. Now, here's the funny thing. This has Swamp Thing, and like, I've never read Swamp Thing. I'm a little ashamed to admit it. I have never read Swamp Thing once in my life. Like, I've never read a single comic of his. I heard that like the new 52 Swamp Thing is really, really good, but I've never read it before. And it's kind of weird because he's like a pop culture mainstay, right? Like most everybody knows what's going on, like who Swamp Thing is when they see him, but like I've never read anything about him. So this is like my first real exposure in comics to his character, and it's amazing. So here's a cool thing. So initially this picks up, I mean, technically it's kind of like chapter 2. They kind of split into chapters like the old anthology books from the 1940s and 50s and 60s, where you would have like a singular book that would go on for 30 pages, but you would have like part 1, which would be like 4 pages, a part 2 might be 6 pages, or chapter 1, chapter 2, something along those lines. But all that really happens here is just like some guy in an apartment is shot in the head, and he's kind of singing this really haunting song. This is actually picked up on by Jim Gordon and Batman. Now, this is where things get hilarious, because with the character of Swamp Thing, from what I've read and from what I understand, he's tied into something called the Green, and that I'm pretty familiar with just because of the whole Injustice stories. But the way it works, as far as I'm aware, the way it originally worked is Swamp Thing was just kind of like this outlier in DC Comics. He was just kind of out there in no man's land, like Hellblazer in the Vertigo stories. He was just kind of out there by himself, and he really wasn't tied into like the rest of DC. But with the new 52, DC rolled him into the shared universe, and what they did is they came up with an idea called the Green. And what they basically said was that in the realm of DC's landscape, you've got the green, which is plant life, you've got the red, which is animals, you've got the black, which is rot. It was almost kind of like this Earth-based equivalent to like the emotional spectrum from the Green Lantern mythos. But the fact remains that Swamp Thing is tied to the green, much like Poison Ivy. And so what this means is that he is effectively immortal. I mean, as long as plant life exists, he will exist. And he can literally just kind of like reconstitute himself, take on additional mass. He has strength of a level that's never been calculated before. He's incredibly capable in terms of what it is that he can do. But that's about the extent of my knowledge on his character. After reading this story, I'm almost inclined to go back and read the new 52 Swamp Thing just to see if it was really that good. I have no idea how long it went on for. I can't imagine it went on too long. 52 issues is what everything ran for in the new 52 because they were all monthly titles, so it's not like it was a super lengthy thing. But the fact remains here, the Swamp Thing basically just kind of reconstitutes himself or forms out of some plant matter and just kind of makes his presence known to Jim Gordon. Now, this is the funny thing because Batman knows who Swamp Thing is, right? So Batman's just kind of like looking at the crime scene and analyzing things, and Jim Gordon is just like, okay, like, this giant swamp monster just kind of emerged behind us, and I really feel like that needs to be said right now. Like, I really feel like we have to acknowledge that this happened, and it's just funny to see people reacting to this. And that's one of the things that I love about King's writing, is because he gives the characters so much character. Like, Jim Gordon is just this guy that's like, okay, look, I mean, I guess it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. We live in a world where bullets bounce off of a man because he's an alien. We've got a guy who flies around at night, or just like glides around at night, dressed as a bat, beating people up. It makes sense that there would be a giant guy who's composed of, plant matter appearing in the middle of a room in a crime scene. But it's kind of cool because while this is happening, Batman's just like, is there a problem? he's totally responding to Swamp Thing as if he's a normal person. Now from here, we switch over to Alfred, and this again is another funny scenario because Swamp Thing being composed, of compost, being a giant compost heap, is just kind of like leaving marks and stuff on the ground, leaving plant marks on the ground. Alfred cleans this kind of stuff up, but it's just like, yeah, it's all par for the course when you're Alfred. It's just kind of the way it goes. Messes get brought in by the giving tree, things just come in, messes get made, and that's really it. But again, it's one of these kind of cool things. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Tom King is so good at characters, and this is where the story really kind of starts to shift a bit towards the character development. And the reason why is because with Swamp Thing, there is no such thing as death, at least as far as he explains it here to Bruce Wayne. There is no such thing as death. A person comes from the earth, or they come from life evolution, however it is you want to look at it, they come from divine intervention, they die, so to speak, but they become one with the earth, and in turn, they feed plants and they feed trees, which provide life-giving oxygen or nourishment to different, critters and organisms across the world. And so there's always kind of like this cycle of life and death, so to speak, but no one's ever really dead. And that's what makes this so cool, is because in his mind, he basically says, look, this man who was killed is my father. He sent me letters, he tried to talk to me. I've spoke to him maybe once after the whole instance with the swamp where I became Swamp Thing, and that was really it. Like, this guy guy never really had a role in the life of Alec Holden. Instead, he was just kind of this guy that Alec knew about, but never really did anything with. Now, the reason why this matters, and the reason why this is so cool, is because what it does is it bridges the gap between Bruce Wayne and Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is this guy where he's basically like, I have this man who's my father that I'll never be able to talk to anymore. I'll never be able to like converse with. I'll never be able to learn more about him. Not that I ever did know much about him in the first place, but now that I want to know about him, I can't because he's effectively gone. I'll never be able to speak to him in the conventional sense. You know, with Bruce Wayne, it's much the same way. His mother and father were killed in front of him. He'll never be able to talk to Thomas Wayne. He'll never be able to talk to Martha Wayne. He'll never be able to get their opinions, get their ideas, ask them, do I make you proud? That's one of the most significant moments about the button. That's why the encounter between Thomas Wayne from the Flashpoint universe and Bruce Wayne from the main DC universe was so significant, because even if it's not his biological father in the traditional sense, it's still his father. You know, it's still the Thomas Wayne that he knew, albeit just a different version of Thomas Wayne. And it was emotional, and it was visceral, and it was amazing. And so because of that, it creates some real emotional tie to these characters, if that kind of makes any sense. And so ultimately what ends up happening here is Swamp Thing basically says, look, I'm just kind of here because I'm interested in solving this murder. And that really kind of seems to be it. I mean, it's like, look, my dad was killed. I want to know what's going on. Now, the initial indication here from Bruce Wayne is that this man was murdered on like the 84th floor of a building. And there's only a handful of people who could have been the ones responsible for that. Now, the first one he goes after is Kite Man. And Kite Man, dude, Kite Man is amazing. Kite Man's so cool. All this guy does is fly around and yell, Kite Man, hell yeah, that's all he does. Like, that's his thing. That's his whole ordeal. Now, of course, the cool thing about this is that Tom King very much plays on the idea of like what Batman's about, right? Like, we know as the Batman is the guy who doesn't kill, but the bad guys don't need to know that. The bad guys just need to believe they're gonna die. And if you're Kite Man and you're soaring 500 feet above the ground and Batman latches onto you and will not let you go, the only thing racing through your mind is you're going to smash into the ground and Batman's gonna let you die. He's gonna bail out, you know, a second before it happens. He's gonna live, but Kite Man's gonna be done with all his living. And so it's kind of cool because, I mean, we know this is not gonna happen. We know he's not gonna die, but the questions that Batman has is, you know, who is it that committed this crime, or how would they have gained access to the resources necessary to commit this crime? Because Kite Man didn't invent his own stuff. He got his stuff from somewhere else. And so again, it's really kind of like one of these whodunit mystery sort of things. And so what Catman basically says is that he grabbed his stuff from a guy named Mooney Money. Now, of course, Mooney Money is clearly a comic book stand-in for Guy Fieri, but the fact remains here that going through all these different sources and jumping through all these different guys, eventually Batman, you know, basically realizes that this murder seems to have been done by a guy by the name of Headhunter. Now, Headhunter is a guy that I know nothing about. I don't know if he's new. I don't know if he is a character that was recently created. I really don't like using Wikipedias just because anybody can edit them, but I don't know anything about that guy. But really, the only explanation we need is what's offered here, where he's basically just like a mercenary, and he always executes his victims by shooting them twice in the head, and no one knows why he shoots a second time. But the funny thing about this is that Bruce Wayne kind of hints at this and says, look, this guy's going to be hard to find because he basically commits his crimes. He goes underground, he goes on the run, and then he only resurfaces whenever he's ready to commit another murder. And so the guy is sporadic. I mean, he pops up here, he pops up there, but there's no pattern to what it is that he does outside of the murders that he commits. And so it's really kind of a cool scenario, because what this shows us is that even within the realm of Gotham City, or even the world as a whole, there are some people out there who are just that good at evading Batman. They're just that good at evading him. And again, it makes Bruce Wayne more realistic. It makes him more grounded. It makes him more tangible, and basically telling us that despite all of his vaunted resources, all of his wealth, all of his capabilities, at the end of the day, he is still only human, and he can only do what a normal human can do. And so because of this, Swamp Thing basically chimes in and says he's currently entering the Gotham Museum of Art. And when Batman's like, how did you find that out? Swamp Thing's response is that the grass told him. And that's the coolest thing about this, because Batman's like, all right, look, man, the grass, all right, if you're talking to the grass, that's cool, whatever, man. Do what you do, man. You be you, I'll be me, and we'll call it a day. And so it's just really kind of funny to see these interactions between these characters who would normally never meet, because they're so starkly different, right? I mean, Batman is hanging out with plant matter as they're going to investigate a murder. And so again, it's interesting to kind of see how these characters relate to one another, how they deal with one another. Now, of course, once they get to the Gotham Museum, they immediately encounter Headhunter, and Headhunter really just kind of starts talking about how he had killed this guy, he had killed the father of Swamp Thing, just because of the fact that he was sort of bragging about how he knows heroes, or he has an in with superheroes, so to speak, only insofar that he knew his son was Swamp Thing, and that was really about it. But it was one of these scenarios where it was this situation where a guy was basically spouting off of the mouth in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Headhunter effectively killed him, basically killed him for that purpose. Now, in response to this, Swamp Thing immediately kills Headhunter. Like, he just immediately crushes him, and Batman's kind of begging him to stop the whole time. But as soon as he's done, Swamp Thing starts crying and basically talking about how his father's dead, he's never going to be able to talk to his father again. Batman's immediate response is like, what happened to, like, there is no death? What happened to, like, everything lives on, to, like, light descending and all that stuff? Like, what happened to that? And Swamp Thing's like, no, man. He's just dead. That's basically what it is. And Batman's so pissed. Like, Batman reads in the riot act, he is so pissed off because in the mind of Batman, Swamp Thing used him, right? Like, Swamp Thing shows up with this whole dog and pony show of, oh, well, nothing's ever really dead. Everything just kind of lives on, in the form of plant life and different things like that, but it's basically him just kind of turncoating here and just being like, that's it, man. Everything's dead. There's nothing to it, man. Like, you die and then that's it. Like, that's just the end of you, and it's kind of crazy because while Batman's reading him the riot act, Swamp Thing's like, I gotta go. And he basically just bails out. And that's it. And it really just kind of ends with Batman screaming at him. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It is an amazing story. This is so good. It is a perfect ending to a Batman story. And I really hope, this question goes out to you guys who are Swamp Thing fans. My question is this: is the new 52 Swamp Thing like this? Or is it just like kind of weird and dark and so on? Because this is an amazing story. And I absolutely love this. I love seeing Batman reading Swamp Thing the riot act, because like Swamp Thing could crush him like a bug, right? Like Swamp Thing would be like, you know what? I'm tired of you, Batman. And then that's just the end of Bruce Wayne. It'd be so cool. Like, it's such a cool scenario to see Batman just not caring and just screaming at Swamp Thing, and then Swamp Thing just being like, I'm out, peace, and then just bailing. Rob Core, man. Y'all know what I'm getting ready to say. Batman! The best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now. Oh my God, dude, this story is so good, man. This story is so good. Like, Tom King, man. Let me tell you something, man. This man's living up to his namesake. He's the king of writing Batman right now. Mostly because he's the only one writing the Batman comic. Detective Comics is good. Detective Comics is amazing. Love Detective Comics. But this right here with Batman is amazing. In all seriousness, though, this is a beautifully written comic. I mean, a beautifully written comic because there's no, like, villains. There's no Bane coming. There's no, oh, the Joker. No, none of that stuff. This is Batman at his most real. This is Batman, like, Batman's character is tangible. You can feel it. The cool thing about this really kind of offers like a follow-up to the whole events with Gotham Girl. And it was always like this unresolved plot line, right? Like, it is this thing that's been going on forever and ever and ever and ever, and it's just never really been resolved. Even now, we still don't know a lot about her. All we really know is that in the beginning of Batman Rebirth, that Gotham and Gotham Girl had just shown up in Gotham City, and they had these powers that made them almost akin to Superman. They could fly, they had durability, enhanced strength, so on and so forth. Now, over the course of the story Gotham, of I Am Gotham, what we had learned is that somewhere along the line, they had effectively sold years of their lives in relation to power, which meant that if you wanted like absolute power, you would have to basically say, here's the X amount of years that I'm willing to give away. What that really means is that the more she uses her powers, the more she drains years off her life. And so she's kind of at this impasse, because if she decides to become a superhero, she's going to start losing more of her life. If she doesn't, she can live out the rest of her days or whatever days she has left as a person. And that's really the crux of this story in a lot of ways, with the exception of the ending. But the cool thing about this is that with the character of Gotham Girl, because she's so powerful, she was one of these people that basically had her emotions messed with by Psycho Pirate. And so as a result, she spent most all of the storylines after the events of I Am Gotham, she spent all the other storylines just kind of sitting in fear. Now, of course, this was really kind of King's way of putting her on the back burner, of just saying, hey, look, we're going to save her for later. But for right now, if we had somebody fighting as part of the Bat family that had strength and power that basically made them equivalent to Superman, then it would just solve all the problems that are coming along. Batman fights Bane, Gotham Girl swoops in and saves the day. It would cause all kinds of issues because fans would be like, well, why doesn't Gotham Girl just do anything? So it allows her to be put on the back burner. But having recovered from her whole experience with regards to the machinations of Psycho Pirate puts her in a position now to where she can basically decide what she wants to do next, because it's really kind of a fresh start for her. And the cool thing about this is that it really asks all these important questions with regards to Bruce Wayne as a character, because with Gotham Girl kind of pondering what she's going to be next, is she going to be a superhero? Is she going to be live a normal life? She asks these questions to Bruce Wayne because he's really the first guidance that she's ever really had in being a superhero. Keep in mind, Gotham Girl and Gotham gained their powers. They decided they wanted to be superheroes, but they didn't have any real training. They didn't go to the Justice League and say, teach teach us how to be superheroes. Batman was the first time they encountered a superhero. And Batman is a very unique case among the superhero community because he's so capable, but he's also just mortal. All it would take is for someone to know Bruce Wayne's identity and then to be sitting on a rooftop on a building somewhere with a sniper rifle. Bruce Wayne gets out of his car, he goes to walk into Wayne Enterprises, he gets shot in the head, and that's the end of Batman. I mean, that's all it would take. A story like that wouldn't be very fun. Like, it's just the death of Batman, that thing is 3 pages long. It would not be interesting at all. But, you know, that's what it takes for this character. But he's so unique, he's so interesting because he's so smart, he's so easily killed. That's what makes the thing so cool about him. But in a lot of ways, he's also the first superhero that Gotham Girl has really encountered that can teach her what it means to be a superhero, to go out and live a normal life. And it's kind of interesting, you know, because she asked the question, what would I do? Like, you know, where would I go? And it's kind of funny because she says, I was hoping you would just point me in the right direction. I was hoping that all of this would be done, that my emotions would be back under control. You know, you would give me a piece of paper and say, follow these rules and you'll have a normal life. That's what she was hoping for, was for him to basically hold her hand and guide her to where she needed to go to become a hero. But at the end of the day, it's not like that, because it's not like that for anyone. There's no rule book on how to live life. There's no guidebook on what you should do and what you shouldn't do. I mean, it's not like you're born, you know, and then you get to the point where you go through elementary school and middle school and high school, you know, and you're ready to go off to college, you're 18 years old, you get your first job, and your parents say, okay, here's the book of life, have fun, and all you have to do is just go through the pages as you encounter situations. How to pay bills, what credit means. I mean, there's no guidebook for that kind of stuff. I think I'm gonna start a YouTube channel like where I do that. the guidebook to life. I have no idea. But nonetheless, you know, these are things that she's literally learning. Now for her, the idea of paying bills, things like that, I mean, that's not essential, but you guys understand what I'm saying. There's no guidebook on how to be a superhero. And that's the kind of crazy thing, is because that's why each member of the Justice League is so significant. You know, despite the fact that he's basically the security guard / guy that hangs around, you know, and just like watches whatever he watches on TV, Black Mirror, I have no idea. Cyborg plays a role in the Justice League. Superman is the backbone. He's the guy where everybody knows no matter how bad things get, it's not over unless Superman's incapacitated. Wonder Woman, the one who will fight until the bitter end. Batman is the brains of the operation. Green Lantern, he's the one that's like, look, if things get really bad, I've got a whole army behind me that I can just bring in to unleash absolute hell. Everybody has a role to play. With Gotham Girl, she's figuring out her role. She's figuring out her life. She's really kind of just having this existential crisis right now. She doesn't know where she belongs. She doesn't know who she's supposed to be or what she's supposed to be about. And Batman says that. Batman says, look, when it came down to it, following the death of my parents, sure, Alfred said, hey, look, here are things that you're supposed to do. You know, here's how you live your life. Here's how you become a man. But when it came to him becoming a superhero, there was no guidebook. Batman did the best he could. He suddenly came across a guy who was donning this Red Hood. They got into a fight. Red Hood fell into a vat and became the Joker. You commit to actions, you do things, they have consequences, and you navigate and chart those waters as best you can. But the funny thing about this is that this creates a lot of questions in the mind of Bruce Wayne. Remember, we did the button. At the end of the button, or during the events of the button, he came face to face with his own father, Thomas Wayne. But that version of Thomas was more significant than the actual New 52 version of Thomas that was shot in that alley. And the reason why is because the Flashpoint version of Thomas Wayne saw his son die. He saw that version of Bruce Wayne killed. His wife, Martha Wayne, became the Joker. These are the kind of things that he dealt with. And so when he sat down with Bruce and he said, go live your life. Do not live your life as Batman. Do not live your life fighting crime. Go and live a life. Go make a life for yourself. Find a woman, settle down, start a family, pass your knowledge on to the next generation. Let somebody else be Batman. Go and live. What he's finding himself doing here is reiterating that exact same advice to Gotham Girl. And she's in turn asking, well, then why don't you follow it? If that's advice that you think is so sound, if it's advice that you think is so legitimate, then why aren't you following it? And this is the beauty of all this. This is the beauty of the whole conversation that they have. Batman says, because I don't know how to not be Batman. I don't know how to be anybody else. That's who I am. That's what I am. My parents were shot in an alley. I'm terrified, you know, that I'd have to relive that experience. I'm terrified of losing the things I care about. The only way for me to cope with that situation is to become Batman. Batman became an ingrained part of Bruce Wayne, so much so that Bruce Wayne is the costume. It's the face he puts on when he goes out in public. When the sun goes down, when the criminals come out, Batman comes out. And that's who Bruce Wayne really is. He doesn't know how to be anything else. And that's what's so cool about this, is because it's hitting home. It's telling us the one thing that we as Batman fans always knew. It didn't take a genius to know that like Batman was the character. Bruce Wayne is just the guy that we see occasionally. That's the way it's always been. But it's so cool to just kind of see that thrown on, you know, in pen and paper and ink, that's what it is. That Bruce Wayne is just, he doesn't know had to be anybody else but Batman. Not only that, the idea of failing to him is a massive calamity. It's something that he's absolutely terrified of. Not only that, while he tries his best to live a normal life, while he tries his best to do the things that ultimately work for him, at the end of the day, he's afraid of what it means to not be Batman. And because of that, he fails. He basically sets himself up for failure. He sits down in his home, in the comfort of his own home, in front of a fireplace with a glass of scotch, and asks the question, I wonder what life would be like if I wasn't Batman. But he looks around the city of Gotham and he says, I'm the last bastion of hope here. I'm the last man standing. I'm the last fig leaf. If I stop being Batman, the city gets overrun. The cops can hardly do the job on their own. The only reason why the city is where it is now is because I operate outside of the law. But I can bend the rules. I can break the rules. I can make people talk who wouldn't talk. I can make people talk who wouldn't talk to the cops. They wouldn't be able to get the information they need. I can swoop in the dead of night. I can make people so scared to commit crimes that they don't rob banks, that they don't mug people in the streets. Some do. But at the end of the day, the biggest threat to the city of Gotham are the big guys, the Joker, the Penguin, Two-Face. Those are the kind of things that we have to worry about. And so in a lot of ways, he's done his job, but his biggest fear is that if he steps down and he walks away, then Gotham's just ripe for the pickings. Word gets around that the Batman's gone. Oh my God, the Batman's gone. Dude, the city is ours. And suddenly it just descends into absolute madness. And so while he wants to live a normal life, he can't, because he's afraid that if he does, he'll fail the city of Gotham. And if he fails the city of Gotham, he'll fail his parents. And that again is why it's all so important, because at the end of the day, it's like that same line. It's like the line that we saw in Injustice 2. That thread doesn't change no matter what universe we're in. If Bruce Wayne is Batman, then it's the same thing all the time. No matter what he looks like, no matter what, huge calamity he's engaged in, no matter what enemy he's fighting or how big his Justice League team is, at the end of the day, the man under that cloak and cowl is a little boy who's crying because his parents got shot in an alley. That's what's so cool about it. And that's what makes it so interesting, is because that's who Batman is. And so taking this advice, when he says, look, this conversation's not about me, and Gotham Girl says, that's the problem. The conversation's not about you. We need to make it about you. Batman has to really ask himself, take a good look at the mirror and say, am I really doing everything I can to live a normal life? Am I really in this position where I've tried everything that I can? And so what he ends up doing is he goes to Catwoman. And this is why it's so gorgeous, because it's not like a knee-jerk thing. It's not like, King was sitting writing this story. He's like, I wonder what would happen if Batman proposed to Catwoman. Let's just see. Let's just have it come out of nowhere. No, it's a gradual work in. It's a gradual thing. It starts, really all the way back, I would dare say, with Scott Snyder's run. But it really picked up steam with Batman Rebirth. It starts with the introduction of Gotham Girl. The possibility existing that Batman can train these two new people so that he can go and have a life for himself, only to find out that one of them goes crazy, ends up being killed by his sister, and the sister's emotions are manipulated by Psycho Pirate, and she ends up having to be taken care of. And it's right back to the way it was before, right back to the way things were before. Bruce Wayne's got to be Batman, and he's got to keep Gotham City safe, and he's got to train Duke for whatever it is that he's got to do. And then suddenly it's Bane. Oh my God, Bane's back. And it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. And then he goes to Barry Allen and says, hey, let's do some investigation about this button. Eobard Thawne shows up. Eobard Thawne just wreaks absolute havoc on Batman, disappears, reappears, rants about having seen God. Barry Allen and Batman jump into the time stream. Batman runs into his own father, Thomas Wayne. Thomas Wayne says, go live your life. The world, the universe, the multiverse is screaming at Bruce Wayne, go live a life, man. Quit being Batman. Go live a life. Go do your thing. And so what does he do? He finally, after so many years, follows the universe's advice, follows the multiverse's advice. Everybody says, go live a life. And he does. He goes to Catwoman in one of the most beautiful moments that I've ever seen in a comic book. He goes to Catwoman and says, from the time I first met you, I knew that you were going to be the one. Whether it was because opposites attract, whether it was because she was just so willing to do whatever it took in order to pull off whatever goal it was she was trying to achieve. At the end of the day, he says, I'm terrified of what it is that I'm about to do. I'm so scared that I might lose you, the one connection that I have to what it can mean to have a real life. I'm terrified of what it means to possibly take this step, because it means I'm going to step down from the life that I've had. But regardless of it all, he tells Catwoman he loves her and he proposes to her. The reason why this is so visceral is because any man who's ever proposed to a woman will tell you that. Any man who's ever proposed to a woman will probably tell you it was the most terrifying moment of my life. Because what if she says no? But for Bruce Wayne, it's not terrifying because maybe she'll say no. It's terrifying because of what this represents. It's terrifying because of what this means. With Bruce Wayne being Batman, the reason why he's kept so many people at arm's length, the reason why he's kept so many people distant is the possibility of losing them. So much loss in his life. He looks around and says, if I propose to Catwoman, if I take this step, if I lose her, it could shatter me, it could break me in a way that I never imagined. But in the end, he doesn't. He takes that step because he's ready for something new. He's ready for a new era of his own life. And that's why this is so great. Because what this does is it bolsters the Batman story now. Because now he's got his own Lois Lane, he's got his own Mary Jane Watson, he's got his own love interest in his life that he has to hold on to, because she's now the closest thing he has to what it means to live a normal life. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. God, this was an amazing story. This is actually going to lead into the War of Jokes and Riddles, which I'm really excited about. But oh my God, was this beautifully written. DC Comics, bravo. This was amazing. It's the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now. Absolutely stellar. I really hope that we get more stuff like this. It's one of the reasons why I love King's Batman so far, because it's just been astronomically amazing. And this is just the cherry on top. It's the icing on the cake. Beautifully done. Okay, so the War of Jokes and Riddles is amazing. This story is incredibly good. In this video, we're covering part 1, and then we'll probably upload a second video either later on today or later on this week that will be part 2, the conclusion of the whole thing. But the War of Jokes and Riddles is incredible. Dare I say, the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now. It is probably one of the best stories that I've read in a long time involving Batman. But this comes directly out of the aftermath of Zero Year, which we've covered, and you'll find that down in the Batman playlist in the description. What this also does is it basically follows up to the idea that Bruce Wayne has only been Batman for a very short amount of time. And so this story is basically a retcon. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with comics and you know what that is, bear with me for a second. For the people who don't, retcon is basically, it's short for retroactive continuity. And what it means is that a writer will basically go back to a particular character and put something in their comics that wasn't there before. This is basically a story that was never told before. It was a set of events that had never been hinted to. We didn't know anything about it. And it's basically just throwing it in there now, saying that this actually happened. And it's essentially a war between the Joker and the Riddler. And it is, God, it is incredible. So the cool thing is that when it came to Batman Zero Year, when it came to like the origin of the Joker, different things like that, the idea was that it was telling the story of how the Joker became the Joker. But it fit in with the notion of the fact that the Joker's a guy that will always be one of Batman's main villains, if not his most significant villain. And so because of that, following the events of Zero Year, the Joker had just sort of taken off. You know, the guy who would become the Joker eventually became the Joker, and then he would just fight Batman later on. What this does is it takes place before a lot of the Joker stories that we saw after Zero Year. What it also does is featuring, you know, kind of talking about the Riddler for a second, the idea was that the Riddler was a little more involved and a little more complex and more developed in terms of, you know, his storytelling. Now, the reason for this was simple. The idea was that when New 52 first launched and writer Scott Snyder was basically crafting his run on Batman, the idea was to bring the Joker back later on down the line during Death of the Family. Technically speaking, Death of the Family is the first major storyline that we see that features the Joker when the New 52 first launched back in 2011. Following that was Batman Endgame. But the idea was that because the Joker was basically put on the back burner to be used at a later date, Snyder started focusing on things like the Court of Owls and the Night of Owls and different things like that, Two-Face and Riddler and so on and so forth. So Riddler got a lot more attention from Snyder, and it basically dealt with the idea of the Riddler taking over Gotham City, setting up all these traps using the various abilities of different villains, and then ultimately being caught and then being arrested and thrown in jail. The cool thing about this is that Edward Nygma, in a lot of ways, I would say, is more dangerous than the Joker is. The reason for this is because of the fact that yes, the Joker is crazy, and yes, the Joker is zany, and yes, you never know what he's gonna do, but Riddler is all about elaborate schemes, elaborate traps. He may start a sequence of events, and the conclusion of those events will not become readily available or won't even be understood until maybe months or even years after they originally start. And that's the cool thing about him, is because while he's in jail, what he actually starts doing is making friends and talking to people. Now, it's really friends in the sense of the fact that because he was so good at figuring out puzzles and riddles and so on, that what he did is he became a source for various cops who were trying to figure out ways to solve crimes that they could not solve on their own. And what it did, it made him kind of an essential figure in the sense that a lot of cops began to get to a point where they needed him. One cop in particular is basically killed by the Riddler, who in turn began begins engineering his own escape. And that's kind of the danger of it all, is because what we end up finding out is that one of the guys the Riddler was talking to, the Riddler didn't ask for anything in particular. He wasn't asking for money, he wasn't asking for resources, he just wanted information about other cops. And the reason why is because when he goes to make his escape, he starts running off the names of all these different cops' family members, their wives, their children, their son, basically being told the names of these people, which in turn he's going to use as part of his plan, work perfectly for him, because he doesn't have to lift a finger, he doesn't have to shoot a person or anything. All he has to do is just say, I know who the people are that you care about, and bad things will happen to them if you do not let me go. And ultimately, that's exactly what they end up doing. They end up just stepping out of the way, they unlock the door, and the Riddler goes about his business. Now, the other half of this is the nature of the Joker himself. Again, because this takes place after the events of the first 0 Year story, which dealt with the origin of the Joker himself, this is when he's full on in the scene in Gotham. And so at this point, people are well aware of who he is. But remember, Bruce Wayne has only been Batman for a very short amount of time. And so that trust between society and Batman, such as it is, has not really been built up yet. The other half of this is that because they basically figure out the location of where the Joker is, what they end up doing is basically blowing up his base of operations, just infiltrating the place, trying to take it down, only to realize the Joker's not there. The problem with this, and the issue the Joker struggles with, is that he's lost his ability to laugh. Not in the literal sense. It's more of a metaphorical thing in the sense that the Joker doesn't really find anything funny anymore. And so the goal is to basically find something funny. Now, what this does is it sets the Joker on the path of looking at Batman as a guy who's basically the butt of every joke, where it basically begins a process of pitting the two of them together about how Batman needs the Joker needs Batman, that kind of a thing. And that's why it's cool, is because at the end of the day, the Joker taking up residence and doing whatever it is he needs to do, and then ultimately he and the Riddler encounter one another. And the proposition offered here by the Riddler is pretty cool. For them, the idea of cops being corruptible is a very simple thing. All they have to do is make enough money to pay off cops, and then those cops are just sorted, and that's it. But Batman cannot be bought. You know, he's not a person that you can just go commit crimes and then talk him out of arresting you. It doesn't really work that way. And so because of that, the goal is basically the two of them sitting down and saying, hey, look, we can make something that's greater than the sum of its parts. We can literally come together and we can kill Batman. When we do, you'll get whatever it is that you need that will make you laugh. I'll finally topple the bats and we can just conquer the city together and just rule it all together. The problem with this is that this feeds into the unpredictability of the Joker. One of the things that makes the Joker so dangerous is he is just as likely to shoot you as he is to work with you. And in this instance, Riddler doesn't know what the Joker's gonna do. There's no predictability there. There's no real pattern there. The Riddler says there is when he basically says, look, I was able to figure out you were the one that was committing all these acts, and I figured out that you can't laugh because you were basically killing comedians and you were attacking places. You were trying to find a joke that you could laugh about and you couldn't find it, but I can help you solve this riddle. Ultimately, the Joker turns on Riddler, actually just shoots him, and then is just done, and that's it. The problem with this is that, remember, back during this point in his career of being Batman, Bruce Wayne was still very new to the whole thing. He was still very unsure of himself in a lot of different ways. He was still figuring it all out. In this instance, he believes the Joker to be more of a credible threat than the Riddler, also because the Riddler was shot and it looks like he's just gonna bleed out and die. Instead, because of the fact that Batman goes after the Joker, the Riddler's able to escape. He's able to get away, and so is the Joker. And so again, that hits home at the inexperience of Batman, the fact that he doesn't really know what road to take. And so ultimately, this massive war breaks out between the Joker and the Riddler, where various villains are essentially forced to take sides. Now, of course, the other half of this is that this also comes out of the idea of Batman's conversation with Catwoman, in the sense, because of the fact that the two of them are supposed to be getting married to one another, the question is, will she actually do it? And it's one of those things where Batman's just kind of dumping his heart out to the world and telling her everything about himself, his deepest, darkest secrets, so that she goes into a marriage with Batman, basically being sure of what it is she's getting into. And that's why it's cool, because at this point, we basically continue to pick up with the Joker in probably one of his most ruthless moments. Now, on the surface, it doesn't seem that ruthless, it doesn't seem that hardcore, but he actually ends up walking into a home that currently belongs to a family, the Templeton family, walks into their home, and the Joker eliminates them all, literally takes them all out, because he's just trying to find something that's funny. The Riddler ends up coming back by basically getting some surgical work done by a disgraced doctor who had long since lost his career. But the other half of this is the perception that it gives us of the Joker in relation to how the rest of the criminal empire views him. When the Joker calls up a guy by the name name of Carmine Infantino, he basically says, look, you have an hour to kill the Riddler, and if you don't do it, bad things are gonna happen. And immediately Infantino's on the job and has his guys taking care of it. He does it reluctantly, but he ends up doing it anyway because he knows that the Joker will follow through with his scheme. This is essentially a scenario where people are just building up soldiers to their side. When it comes to the Riddler teaming up with Poison Ivy, this was already established in Zero Year when he used a lot of the things that she had to his advantage in order to basically pull off taking over Gotham, a lot of the traps and different things like that. But when Infantino's guys run up on Riddler and Poison Ivy, they're taken out almost right off the bat. And so of course, because of that, once Infantino shows back up and the Joker's sitting in his office and he says, an hour's passed and the Riddler's still alive, we end up finding out that the Joker had traveled 3 hours to Metropolis to find the mother of Carmine Infantino, killed her, and then took all of her teeth out of her mouth. That was what he did in response to Infantino not following his directions like he said. And that's why people are so terrified of the Joker, is because of the lengths he will go to in order to pursue his goal. That's why he's so dangerous. And so ultimately, with Batman essentially discussing this whole thing, it turns into just this massive war. I mean, on one side, you have the Riddler, and you've got, Deathstroke, and you got Two-Face, and you have Scarecrow, and you got Victor Zsasz, and, all these different guys. On the sides of the Joker, you've got Mr. Freeze, you've got Solomon Grundy, you got the Mad Hatter, you got Deadshot. You have these guys who are basically criminals that just kind of go about and they do their own things. But all these different villains that exist in Gotham City are perfectly aware of the fact that the Riddler and the Joker are two of the most dangerous, if not the two most dangerous villains that exist. And so because of that, they basically fall rank and file. They essentially choose their sides with whoever it is they think will ultimately win. Now, the other half of this is something this does is it actually switches over to a completely different guy, a guy by the name of Kite Man. And Kite Man is the best character ever. I love Kite Man. Hell yeah, I love Kite Man so much, but he's got like the saddest story ever. Now, a little bit of history here. Kite Man goes all the way back to 1960 with Batman issue number 133, and he was really more of just like a joke character that was created by Bill Finger. The idea was that Kite Man was like the man who can fly anything, is really what it was, and he would just commit crimes by using contraptions largely associated with kites, and then that would just really be it. He'd be caught by Batman, he'd get beat up, and then he would get thrown in jail, or he would end up getting out. He played some roles here and there. He would, he had involvement in like Infinite Crisis, different things like that, but for the most part, he was just this background small-time joke character. In this particular story, his origin is traumatic, and he's really this incredibly interesting character because the whole idea of the war of jokes and riddles is not necessarily just the Joker and Riddler going to war against one another. It's the people caught in the middle, and there have been a lot of people caught in the middle of this whole thing. Focusing more on the idea of Charles Brown, the whole purpose of this is that he's one of these guys who had previously worked on the Joker mobile for the Joker, so he's got ties to one of them already, and in his desperation, Batman actually snatches him up, subdues him, and then sends him in to essentially spy on the Joker. The problem with this is that him spying is immediately figured out by the Riddler because of the fact that they have spies on both sides. And so brought before the Riddler, he basically spills the beans. He's eventually brought before the Joker, who figures out where he basically explains everything that's going on. And so again, it creates kind of a weird scenario because ultimately what ends up happening is we basically find out that because the Riddler had realized that Charles was basically a spy for Batman going to work for the Joker and had already been taken by the Riddler, ultimately the Riddler had actually poisoned his son. And so the result is that he basically ends up losing his son. And that's what's so crazy is because what this does is it unhinges him. He's not Joker crazy. He's basically just sort of lost his mind to a degree. And so what ends up happening is he actually just kind of takes massive pieces of fabric, starts cutting them out into the shape of a kite, gives himself a bodysuit, and then just starts calling himself Kite Man. And so as funny as it is, at the end of the day, it's basically this idea that he is a guy who was really stuck in this crossfire and experienced one of the worst traumatic experiences that a parent can ever have, which is losing their child. The other half of this is that we'll actually find out there's a lot more going on with the creation of his character than we originally thought. But with regards to the major event itself, the idea is that with Commissioner Gordon looking at the fact that you basically have the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, which have been taken over by the Joker and the Riddler, the goal is to find a way to bring the war to an end, to basically preserve Gotham City so nobody else has to experience a casualty like this. The crazy thing about it is that when Jim Gordon goes to meet with the Joker, when he goes to meet with the Riddler, he's given demands by both sides in terms of how he's supposed to show up. The Joker just says, show up in your underwear. Because it's the Joker, and when you're the Joker, that's what you do. The Riddler is a lot more complex, as his character should be. Now, the cool thing about this is that this is designed to display two diametrically opposing sides and juxtapose them next to one another. The Joker is simple. He's just a crazy guy who wants to take take out Batman, that's it. The Riddler is complicated, he's intriguing, he's got all this lore and all this mythology to him. The other half of this is that the war of jokes and riddles is being fought on a multifaceted level. You basically have criminals fighting in the streets of Gotham City. In this instance, it's Deathstroke, a genetically modified super soldier, against Deadshot, who's just a super accurate guy. But because they're the two greatest mercenaries in the world, their fight spans 5 days and 62 people die in the process. So it is a massive calamity between these guys facing off against one another, and it's a pretty big deal. At the end of the day, it all basically comes down to Batman. It comes down to him as a character having to figure out a way to end this war, knowing that it's not going to stop until the Joker or the Riddler achieve their goal of essentially taking him out. Now, the cool thing about this is that because Batman has the Wayne family fortune at his disposal, what he actually does is he orchestrates a sit down between the Riddler and the Joker. It's basically just them bickering with each other the whole time, just taking pot shots, and like the Riddler making fun of him and that kind of a thing. But it's interesting to see this happen because it goes down exactly as we would expect, in the sense that they just sort of argue and carry on different things like that. But it's basically them making the case as to why it is that they should be the one to take down Batman. And that's the proposal that Bruce Wayne offers here. Again, they don't know that Bruce Wayne is Batman. They have no idea that the two of them are the same person. And so going through and basically pretending as though he doesn't care about the Batman concept, he doesn't care whether Batman lives or dies, that his loyalty is directly to Gotham City itself, he basically says, both of you guys make your arguments on who it is you think should win, and I'll give $1 billion to the winner, and that'll allow them to pay off all the criminals in Gotham City, pay off the cops, do whatever it is they need to do in order to basically take out Batman. And it's kind of crazy because what we end up finding out is that prior to this sit down, the Joker and the Riddler had basically both brought in hostages under the idea that if something were to happen to them, the hostages would be killed. What ends up happening is the Joker agrees to free his hostages, and the Riddler believes he killed his before he showed up, which he did. It's pretty, I mean, it's not funny, but it's messed up. I mean, it's pretty messed up. I mean, it's kind of rough, but the fact remains here that it is interesting to me because, again, it really hits home with the notion that Bruce Wayne is having to do a lot of things that he never thought he would. When it came to the character of Batman, the idea was to basically be a guy who could essentially walk the middle ground. He could walk the middle line where he was basically always doing the right thing. He'd have to make some questionable choices here and there, but there would be the good guys and the bad guys. And the cool thing about the whole War of Jokes and Riddles story so far is that what it shows us is the lengths that Batman has to go to from now on, to basically be the guy that could take out the criminals, is he will have to become the anti-hero, who will have to blur the lines, that sometimes he's going to have to make questionable choices that will force him to ask the question, am I really a good guy? And so that's kind of the crazy thing about this. And one of the major choices that he makes is he sits down and he says, if I have to pick a winner and if I have to bring this war to an end, and the only way to stop it is to basically take out one of these guys, then which guy do I side with? He basically makes the smarter choice and sides with the Riddler. Because the Joker is so far gone in a lot of different ways, because he's just so crazy, if Batman were to take up sides with the Joker, then the Joker may very well just kill him. At this point, the Riddler and the Joker both want to win. So it's really one of those things where it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But there's no guarantee the Joker would see it that way. If the Joker and the Riddler are at war with one another and their ultimate goal is to take out Batman, but in the short-term goal is to take out the other person, the Joker may bypass all that. The Joker may say, well, I mean, the ultimate goal is to take out Batman, so I'm just gonna take him out and be done, and that's it. And then whatever happens, happens. That's the crazy thing, but the Riddler is a lot more fluid in his thought, analytical in terms of how he looks at things. The Riddler's immediate goal is to take out the Joker, after which, then he'll focus on Batman. And so because of that, Batman sides with the Riddler. It's just the smarter choice to make. Now, the other half of this is also using the resources of the Kite Man against both Joker and Riddler, using kites to fly into where the Joker's at, and then in turn, in the middle of the whole conflict, once the Joker's temporarily defeated, and the most logical thing happens when the criminals of the Riddler turn against Batman, he basically set things up so that Kite Man could modify the packs, kick him into action, and they would basically yank the criminals out of Gotham City into the air, where they'd be swooped up by Alfred and the Bat Blimp, because apparently the Bat Blimp is still a thing. But the idea here is that this ultimately boils down to the Joker and the Riddler fighting against Batman. But the crazy thing about this is that this is essentially everything Bruce Wayne has been talking about. When he's been going through and recounting this entire story to Selina Kyle, to Catwoman, basically saying, this is where I committed the act that I swore I never would have committed before, we end up finding out that in the middle of this conflict, conflict, the only option Batman feels he has in order to successfully take out the Riddler is to kill him. And that's exactly what he ends up doing. He harkens back to the idea of the Riddler killing Kite Man's son. He harkens back to the idea that this war has cost so many lives and has seemingly been pointless. And in that anger, in that wrath, while he is of clear and sound mind, he takes the action of trying to kill the Riddler. Now that's huge for Batman, because it'd be different if Batman just let himself go, right? Like if he just acting out of rage and wasn't thinking clearly and had a temporary moment of insanity and went to go kill the Riddler, that would make a lot more sense for the Batman character in terms of fans letting it slide. I mean, Batman fans will let Batman get away with anything, but in terms of, people looking at it and saying, okay, this is not something Batman normally should have done, him being of clear and sound mind shows us how far and how fast he was able to fly. But again, it really hits back home to the nature of the fact that he's inexperienced, because Batman as we know him now, which is to say, if you go crack open a story from DC Rebirth and you read I Am Bane or something along those lines, Batman is calm. He's almost in complete and total control of his faculties, and he never allows himself to get carried away with wrath or anger, and if he does, it's momentary. It's never a major thing. In this instance, he's still young, he's still reckless. Allowing himself to get carried away falls in perfectly with the idea that he's still trying to figure out his place in this whole pantheon of superheroes in the DC universe in relation to all the criminals that exist in Gotham City. Trying to kill the Riddler is a pretty big deal, because what ends up happening is the Joker actually gets in his way, and the Joker stops him, and in his insanity finds the whole thing hilarious. But that's what's crazy about it, is because the Joker stopped Batman from killing the Riddler, and that's nuts. It's wild to really think about it that way, that the Joker was the thing that kept Batman from falling over the edge. Now this hits home with the nature of the Joker, right? Like it's a well-established fact. The Joker needs Batman. He needs to have him there. He needs to keep him there. And so it makes sense that he would go that length. But spilling all these beans to Selina Kyle, basically telling her that he allowed himself to fall to that point where he almost became the villain that kills people, he ultimately ends up saying, look, if we're going to do this, you have to know what you're getting into. I've fallen before. I've made that mistake. But Selina Kyle's argument is everyone has. The fact that you did this, all it does is it makes you human. You get carried away. You get angry. You get sad. You get filled with emotion just like anybody else. It's not a failing. It's the fact that you recognize that you fell that makes you great, because it means that you know where you can get down to and you don't want to be there anymore. And that's why it's cool, is because it's her saying, if you get to that point, if you feel yourself slipping, then I will be your guide. I will be the anchor by which I can pull you from the bottom of this ocean of despair, and I can bring you back to the light. And so when the question's asked, will you marry me? Selina Kyle says yes. Okay, so I'll be honest, man, this writing regarding Batman and Catwoman, it's so cool. Like, it's really amazing. Like what Tom King is doing is probably the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth. So the whole idea of Batman and Catwoman, it really throws into sharp relief the nature of like marriages in comic books, right? Because there's two types of marriages. There's the ones that are gonna be difficult but interesting, and then there's the ones that are too easy. Like, for example, Superman and Wonder Woman. I mean, granted, Superman and Wonder Woman never got married, but they were dating for a while when the New 52 first kicked off, and fans didn't really like it. What story could you write that would involve Superman and Wonder Woman that could be compelling and last any real measure of time? Like, oh no, Lex Luthor has green kryptonite and he's attacking Superman with it. You know what? Wonder Woman shows up and she knocks out Lex Luthor and she grabs her green kryptonite and she throws it into space, and Superman gets up and says, thank you, Wonder Woman, and the story's over. That's it. Whereas when you have Superman and like Lois Lane is human. She has no powers. She's just a reporter, and she's in danger a lot of the time, but she could also hold her own. But the fact that she has no powers forces the writer to rely on Lois Lane's ingenuity in order for her to pull it off. And it's cool, because with Batman and Catwoman, it's much the same way. It makes sense that Batman and Catwoman would get together. Now, this whole idea of Batman marrying Catwoman, or at least proposing to Catwoman, does set in stone this idea that there can be some pretty compelling stories. And this initially picks off with the two of them just kind of roaming through the desert and having to put a horse down because it just can't walk anymore. Now, it's kind of intriguing, because the interaction between the two of them in some ways is almost like an Aaron Sorkin TV show, like an Aaron Sorkin script, right? Like if you guys ever watch a show like The West Wing or The Newsroom or something like that, the way that Aaron Sorkin writes interactions between people never talk that way. But it is interesting to see. And with Batman and Catwoman, it's much the same way, where they sort of have these interactions, like they'll finish each other's sentences or they'll know what the other's thinking or something along those lines. And it's almost like a fictional account of how you imagine a relationship to be. But it works with these two characters because they'd been enemies for so long, but there's always been this kind of romance between the two of them. And it works, and it's really, really cool. But the other half of this is the Bat family, right? Like we talked about in Red Hood and the Outlaws, that in a lot of ways, Jason Todd doesn't see himself as a tried and true member of the Bat family. He is, but he doesn't necessarily see himself that way. But in the middle of the Bat family hanging out, doing whatever it is that they do in their off time, I guess hanging out in the library and just, kicking their feet up and just talking about stuff, Alfred shows up. Now, Alfred showing up is always interesting because Alfred's like the father figure for Bruce Wayne, right? And I mean, while he is there to serve the Wayne family, keep in mind, Bruce doesn't really treat Alfred like a real butler, which is to say he's not like, your job is to come here, do these things, and then you leave. No, he's a father figure. Bruce Wayne is almost always inclined to take the advice of Alfred unless it runs contrary to what Bruce Wayne wants to do, which is actually about pretty far from like a father figure. I mean, it's actually kind of far from, okay, so I don't know how you reconcile those two things together. But switching back to Batman and to Catwoman, because again, this will bounce back and forth between those two groups to a degree. We basically pick up with the Tiger. Now, the Tiger is a really interesting character. In fact, he was introduced in the early days of the New 52 when DC was experimenting with the character of Dick Grayson. One thing to remember is that when DC rebooted in 2011, they were switching things up for a lot of characters. A lot of it was looking at characters who had existed for a long time and said, how can we make them more intriguing? And Dick Grayson was a really good example of that. I mean, you got to think about it. Dick Grayson appeared back in 1939, 1940, something along those lines. So he was basically Robin for like 45 years. And then eventually he became like Nightwing, becoming Nightwing, having his own story, holding his own character. He did that for, over 20 years. And then eventually when DC rebooted everything in 2011, they made him a secret agent. And while a lot of people didn't like it, it was interesting because it provided different levels of storytelling. Now, Tiger was introduced as like the best spy of Spiral, which is the organization that Dick Grayson worked for. But it is kind of cool because it's always been this theme with his character that he's the best broker of information in the world. He knows everything that goes on. And so the idea is that Batman and Catwoman are searching for a particular person. Now from here, we jump back to the Bat family. And this is really funny. This is like a pretty cool situation because Alfred is just kind of like, all right, look, Bruce Wayne left and he went on this illegal mission and there's something that he did that I'm not supposed to tell you about, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And everybody's guess is like, okay, so like it's going to destroy the Bat family, right? Because that's usually what happens with Batman's secrets. The big, huge revelation that Alfred drops is Bruce Wayne proposed to Selina Kyle, to Catwoman, and she said yes. And people are just like, what? Even Ace the Bat Hound is just like, what? They're like, no way that happened. That's crazy talk. It's really funny to see that whole relationship unfold. Now from here, picking back up with Bruce Wayne, with Batman and Catwoman, they basically kind of stumble across this guardian of the desert for the most part. And again, it's very ambiguous here in the beginning. It's kind of like, what's this guardian hiding? Nobody's supposed to get in there. There's a pact that was struck between the Justice League and the United Nations where it was, you stay away, we stay away. No one goes in there. So it's like whatever's inside this cave has to be a pretty big deal. Now the other half of this, and one of the things that Tom King is really, really good at, is messing around with the character of Catwoman in the sense that a lot of people view her as like a little girl. Like you're here to have fun, but you're way in over your head. When in reality, Catwoman's pretty rough around the edges. And this guy probably has about 4 feet on her and she beats the crap out of him. It's amazing. It happens off panel, but it's pretty hilarious to see it all take place. But again, the other half of this is that of course, Alfred gets a response to the Justice League saying, hey, look, somebody went into the cave when they weren't supposed to and so on and so forth. And this kind of tips the Bat family off that somebody needs to intervene or at the very least needs to show up. Now, of course, with Tiger leading Batman and Catwoman into this cave, it is kind of cool because basically it's this idea that Damian Wayne wants to be the person to go in there. Damian Wayne knows exactly what Batman's looking for, and his response is, we have to go and get him. But the fact remains here, the person that Batman's searching for inside this cave is Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's al Ghul. Now, this is a very big deal because Talia al Ghul is the mother of Damian Wayne, i.e. the mother of Bruce Wayne's child. And of course, it was one of those scenarios where Bruce Wayne was kind of duped, and then ultimately, Talia al Ghul slept with him, and then eventually it led to Damian Wayne being born about 9 months later. But the fact remains here is it's a meeting of the exes. The other half of this is that Tom King is really, really good at building on the nature of Batman and Catwoman. I mean, one thing to keep in mind here, you basically got a man who has a hard time trusting anybody who is engaged to a woman who's a professional thief. And so it's almost just kind of like oil and vinegar. You would never expect them to mix, but they do. And it works so well. The other half of this is that with Talia al Ghul basically being told Bruce Wayne has proposed to Catwoman and he's brought her here, it's almost like a bit of jealousy. It's almost like a little bit of, well, that's not cool. Like, why would he bring his ex here or bring his fiance here? Which it does kind of make sense. Of course, with regards to like all the guards that Talia al Ghul sends after them, I mean, they make pretty quick work of it. This is by no means meant to be a great big huge point of the story. It's just really designed to show that working together, Batman and Catwoman as a couple are greater than the sum of its parts, which is to say they're better together than they are separate. This leads to the arrival of Superman. And of course, basically Superman says, look, Batman's not supposed to be in there, but the worst thing that we can do is dig a deeper hole so nobody else is going in there. Now, in truth, this is kind of Tom King's way of basically keeping things pretty limited. If Superman allowed Damian Wayne to go in, well, then Superman would probably have to go in. And suddenly you have this veritable army of people running into this cave, and it would overcomplicate the story. And so Superman kind of showing up saying, look, you can't go in there. Of course, he takes off to Central City because of some alien invasion, something like that. And this ultimately leads to the whole idea of like Damian and Dick Grayson are considering going in, but of course Dick Grayson chimes in and says, look, Superman can still see you from Central City. So he'll be back here in a heartbeat if he sees you going in there, which is kind of funny. And again, this is the cool thing, is because the character writing here is interesting. And it's what Tom King doesn't forget about. In this scenario where Damian Wayne's like, everybody wants to kill you using kryptonite, I would use magic. But Superman's response is, well, I mean, you got to think about it, Damian. If you killed me, then Jonathan wouldn't like you anymore. And like, that's enough to stop Damian. Your friend won't want to hang out with you anymore. Now, the other half of this is also the relationship between Dick Grayson and Damian. Remember, when Damian first came up, him and Dick Grayson bumped heads in the extreme. Over the years of Damian's development, starting in the pre-New 52 era, going all the way up to the launch of the New 52, a lot of it's been the evolution of Damian Wayne. It's the evolution of a kid who was raised in isolation, who was raised outside of tried and true human interaction and being forced to interact with people and not really knowing how to do it. I mean, again, kind of the epitome of social awkwardness. I've met a few fans from the Rob Corps who are socially awkward, and they'll tell you, man, that doesn't fly with me. To sidetrack here for a second, we've done meetups, and they'll be like fans who just kind of sit around in the background because they're nervous and they don't know what to say. And I'm like, nope, I'm gonna get you to talk one way or another. I'm gonna get you to talk, and I'm gonna answer your questions on which character is my favorite superhero and who can beat who, and we'll get ice cream and all kinds of cool stuff like that. I love hanging out with fans. It's one of my favorite things to do. Anyway, Batman correctly deduces the idea that these guys showing up and facing off against him and Catwoman are not to kill them, it's to tire them. Because Talia al Ghul finally makes her presence known and says, I challenge the both of you. Now, in truth, she overcomes Batman pretty quickly. And I would surmise Batman actually lets that happen. That under normal circumstances, Batman could easily take out Talia al Ghul. And the fact that Batman was so easily overtaken by Talia al Ghul indicates that he let her overtake him. Because from there, her focus shifts to Catwoman. Now, I would not believe that Batman would let Catwoman die. For me, I think it's more of a test. Where does she reside? And that kind of seems to be how this goes, with regards to the way the story ends. But the battle between Catwoman and Talia al Ghul, the battle itself isn't really so great as much as the dialogue between the two. Because one of the things that happens is Batman says, look, we're here for a girl named Holly. Catwoman was accused of killing 237 people. She took the rap for a girl named Holly. We're gonna get Holly to basically confess to her crime so that Catwoman can be free and she can marry me without having to live underground and worry about cops chasing her down all the time, to give her some measure of freedom that's out there. But the whole dialogue between the two is Talia al Ghul starts to run over this whole scenario where she says from the time that she could walk all the way up to the time that she became a formidable fighter that she is, her father Ra's al Ghul would throw her a sword and say, fight, and you keep fighting until I tell you to stop fighting. And if she died, he'd throw her into the Lazarus pits, resurrect her, bring her back out, and start the whole process all over again. But the whole scenario, the whole thing that Talia al Ghul is hitting home is that there's a difference between the way that Catwoman lives and the way the world really is. It's a battle of ideologies. There's two kinds of people out there. There's people living their heads in the clouds, and then there's people who understand the world the way it really is. And that's what this is designed to be. Talia al Ghul is the darker side. She's the part that she believes matches Bruce Wayne, because Batman has the dark side. He's got the brutal side, the part that doesn't really want to let bad guys live, because if they live, then they'll probably go back to committing their crimes again. It's that side of Bruce Wayne, whereas Catwoman is really kind of like the caring side, the loving side. And that's what's so interesting about this, is because there is this conversation that takes place between Dick Grayson and Damian Wayne. Dick Grayson asks Damian Wayne, do you know why Batman proposed to Catwoman? And Damian Wayne's initial response is, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, you can offer an opinion, but at the end of the day, it's just your opinion. And Dick Grayson's response is, because it makes him happy. But the reason why he didn't tell us is because it means he's asking for something. And that's the coolest thing, is because Dick Grayson sits down and he says, look at Batman's history. Look at everything that Bruce Wayne does. All he does is give and give and give and give. He sacrifices himself for the betterment of others. It's always been giving things up. It's always been losing things. Batman's never really been able to say, this is mine. Batman lost his parents. He lost Jason Todd. He lost Alfred for a time. It's always giving things away, losing things. Whereas with Selina Kyle, Batman's being selfish and he's earned it. Batman's earned happiness. And it's not easy for Batman to ask for things. And again, that's the funny scenario about this, because Damian Wayne's response is, well, Batman's happy. And Dick Grayson's response is, no, he's not happy. He's not happy at all. He's never been happy. Ever since he lost his parents, he's never been happy. It's always been on the quest to stop crime. But look at everything he's lost in the process. He's never really had any measure of a long-term romantic relationship. His parents have been dead for years and you'll never get him back. He's lost Robins over the years for whatever reason. He's always lost these important figures in his life. He's lost friends. He's lost superheroes. He's always lost things. What he wants is something to hold on to, somebody that he can have that wants to be there too. And so again, it's really interesting because this is probably the most human analysis of Batman that there's ever been. And that's why it's so cool. That's why it's so amazing, because it's this philosophical perception that Batman just wants to be happy. Batman wants to finally come home and he wants to hang his coat up and say, I'm done. And that's what this all really seems to be about. Tom King is knocking on the door of this possibility that when Batman gets married to Selina Kyle, that a time will come when he will just walk away from Batman and just say, I'm done now. I'll be an advisor, I'll pop into the comics occasionally, but from this point going forward, somebody else will be Batman. I doubt it'll stay that way for any measure of time, if it even happens at all. I mean, I personally think this is gonna end with something terrible happening. Catwoman's gonna die or something sad like that. I have no idea. But, in my mind, it is beautifully done. It's a great analysis because Batman just wants to be happy. He's just like everybody else. He's tired of fighting. He's tired of, struggling, tired of giving things up, tired of losing things all the time. He just wants some measure of peace, some small measure of peace. And that's why it's cool, because at the end of this whole battle, ultimately Selina Kyle's able to overcome Talia al Ghul. But ultimately, Selina Kyle approaches Holly and of course says, look, I'm trying to find happiness myself. I'm trying to get away from this life that I've been living of thievery and crime and so on and so forth, but I can settle down with a man that I love and I can find happiness, and I need you to help me do that by confessing to the crimes you committed. Now, the other half of this is Talia al Ghul. Talia al Ghul kind of sits down after the fight with Catwoman, sits down next to Bruce Wayne and is like, look, man, you didn't make that bad of a choice. She's pretty cool. And so that's why it kind of seemed to be a test of sorts. Is this one of those things where she really is legit? Now, honestly, it's not like Talia al Ghul's word is law. It's just one of those lines that's just kind of thrown out there like, hey, I mean, she's a pretty good choice. But it is kind of interesting in terms of the whole connection between the two, because Damian Wayne kind of asked his father, when Batman emerges with Catwoman, he kind of asked the father, are you happy? And so of course, this really hits home with the idea that Damian Wayne is finally getting involved into the nature of his father's role. Does he care that his father's happy or unhappy? Whatever the case may be, it is interesting in terms of the evolution of these characters, how they relate to one another. Damian finally beginning to view Batman as a legitimate father figure instead of a person who is his father that he just happens to live with. So this story is like the greatest Batman story ever told. Really, it's like a Batman Superman story, but it's like the greatest story ever told. I love this story so much. I haven't read everything about Batman, so I guess maybe it's not, I guess I can't really say it's the greatest story ever told, but of the stories I've read, it's like the best Batman story ever told. It's so cool because this is all about like bromance between Batman and Superman, as well as like Catwoman and Lois Lane. Okay, what would be the woman equivalent of a bromance? Like, I don't know what the woman equivalent of that is. Like a womance, I guess? I don't know. Like maybe there's friends. I don't know. Like BFFs. I have no idea. Like what the equivalent of that is. But it is cool because like initially this kind of kicks off with like Superman and Lois Lane kind of going back and forth, right? And the whole reason why is because Lois Lane is like, you should call Batman. Like, we need to hang out. Like, we need to like get together and like we need to like hang out and have some fun and just like have like an adults night out, because like it would be fun. And it's kind of funny because like Superman avoids it, right? He's just kind of like, oh well, I'm busy. I've got stuff, that I've got to do. I've got, superhero things. Like, it's just making up reasons for why you can't call Batman. And at the same time, Batman does the same thing, right? Catwoman and Batman are facing off against some guys, and it's like, well, you should call Superman. Like, he's like the best friend you have. Like, we need to hang out. We got to get together. And that's what's kind of funny about this is like, when it comes to the way these stories are done, you have like Lois Lane and Catwoman who kind of stand in as the voice of reason. And we wouldn't normally expect it to be that way, right? Like, we would expect it to be like Batman and Superman who are like the voices of reason. But they're like two guys who just can't bring themselves to call each other because it's all kind of based on pride and all that kind of stuff. But as this goes on, it kind of begins to sort of dwindle things down to where we get to like the heart of the matter of why they won't necessarily call each other. Lois Lane wants to meet Catwoman, and like Catwoman wants to meet Lois Lane. And so really to kind of like bring the two together, sort of going through their husbands, it's really funny, because when it comes to like Lois Lane, she sits down and says, look, I've looked into Catwoman. I've looked into what she's about. I've looked into who she is as a villain, basically, like Selina Kyle, and I'm curious about her. Like, I want to know what would lead a person to want to marry Batman? I want to know what level of insanity would drive a person to that clause. I need to know why this is the case. And again, it is fun because we would kind of expect them to just, Superman is kind of be like, okay, cool, let's call, let's see what's up, like let's get together. But once we start to go through into these little nicks and crannies, these little tidbits, these little small things that sort of make these characters who they are, what we end up finding out is like Batman and Superman in a lot of ways idolize each other. Like, I mean, you got Superman fighting against some radiation guy. I don't really know his name. I don't really care enough to look it up. But you got Superman fighting some radiation guy. You've got Batman going against this various group, and really these roads are kind of leading them to each other. But it's not really the villains they're facing. That's not the important part of this. The important part of this is that they sort of highlight the other's existence. They highlight the other's purpose, the role they play. They highlight who they are and what they're about. When it comes to Batman, he sits down and he simply says, or at least when Catwoman speculates, it says that you're ashamed of me. Of course, Batman's response is, of course not. That's crazy talk. I am not ashamed of you at all. That would land me in the doghouse if I said yes, even if I was joking. But still, from Batman's perspective, he almost sees Superman as like a better man than him. And that's what's so interesting about this. But at the same time, Superman sees Batman as a better man than him. Each one puts the other on a pedestal. And that's what's so cool about this, because all they really see are like the great aspects of each other. Now, that's just a hallmark of having a friendship that stood the test of time for so long. I mean, that's really kind of the thing that goes into all this, is that you've got Superman and Batman, who were like the 1-2 punch of DC Comics. And they've been enemies, they've been friends, all those things, but all that is kind of built up over the years into this tried and true friendship that's had its ups and downs. But each one respects the other to such a degree that they don't really see the flaws in the other person. I mean, they know they're there, but they don't really look at those aspects. They look at what makes them great. Batman is the detective. He's like one of the smartest men, if not the smartest man. I would argue that maybe Lex Luthor is a little bit smarter depending on what circumstance we're talking about, but by and large, like Mr. Terrific, Batman, Lex Luthor have like the top 3 spots. But still, in the eyes of Batman, Superman is like the hero. He's the good guy, like he's the Boy Scout. And even if Batman will give him a hard time over it, there's respect found in that. There's respect found in the idea that Superman will put all others above himself, and Batman will too. But where Batman is kind of like the dark and brooding side of like a singular person, Superman's kind of like the uplifting side. That's the cool thing about this. You juxtapose these people, you put them into like one person, and suddenly like they're just two sides of any one individual person. They keep each other balanced and they keep each other grounded. And so what ends up happening is that the villains they face basically lead them to like one particular building, and they take 2 different entrances to get in there. Batman sneaks in because he's Batman. Like that's what you do when you're Batman. You don't just walk in the front door. That's crazy talk. If Batman were gonna go grocery shopping, for example, Batman would not go to like, Kroger's and like walk in the front door. He would like jump on top of the building and like sneak down through like the ductwork and then like sneak around and get what he wants and then like swipe his back credit card and be out before anybody knows he's there. But like when you're Superman, you're like, yeah, man, we gotta go grocery shopping because we're low on lettuce, and then like you go in there and you buy the stuff you need and then you leave like a normal human being does. But still, like they end up running into each other, and it is kind of funny because what ends up happening is like they're kind of standoffish, right? Like, well, I didn't expect to see you here, Batman. And it's then you have like Selena Kyle and Lois Lane, and Lois Lane's like, you must be Catwoman. It's nice to meet you. And like they immediately break the ice and start shaking hands. Now, of course, these villains show up and of course they make quick work out of them. But Superman's response is, well, let's get some dinner. This is where the story gets amazeballs. It gets so cool. They show up to the Gotham County Fair and it's superhero night. Now, all right, I want to be honest with you guys. I've been to a lot of fairs. All right, I've been to a lot of fairs, a lot of carnivals in my time. I have never seen a carnival or fair where it's like, you can't get in here unless you're dressed as a superhero. I really want to go to one of these. Anyway, when these guys get in here, it's kind of funny because they're immediately turned away, right? They're like, hey, look, it's superhero night. You have to be a superhero. If you're not dressed as a superhero, you can't come in here. And they don't believe they're superheroes, even though this guy is talking to Batman and Superman. Lois Lane and Catwoman have this genius idea where they're like, well, let's just switch costumes. Batman can be Superman and Superman can be Batman, and like Lois Lane will be like Catwoman. And it's like the most beast idea ever, right? Because like the whole time Batman's like, no, we're not doing this. Like we're not doing this. All right, we're not switching into costumes. We're not trading places. We're not doing any of this stuff. We're just gonna sit and be sad because like I'm Batman, that's what I do. I mope. And so like you guys know it, Batman mopes, but still, like the funny thing is that where Batman's adverse to it all, Catwoman's like, well, you guys misunderstand what he's saying when he says no. When he says no, what he means is that he knows his fiance is really hungry and she's being very patient right now, but her patience is running out very, very fast, and he recognizes he needs to remedy that, and so he's going to do that. Aren't you, Batman? Because it's in your best interest to do that. And so like they do. As any married man will tell you, if the wife ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
And so it's funny because like they basically switch costumes, and like the whole time this happens, it looks amazing. Like it's so cool because you've got Batman who's cheery and Superman who's just like mopey. You know, like I'm just gonna call him Batman Superman now. I'm gonna confuse the heck out of you guys. But you got like Bruce Wayne Superman who's just like, this is not going to be fun. But I mean, look at this. It's like the most fun ever. Like they're eating corn dogs, and like Lobo is doing the hammer machine thing that like people always fail at and they feel bad. I mean, it's cool with this thing because like they go into the tunnel of love, and it's like a married couple versus a newlywed couple. Clark Kent and Lois Lane come out. This is so weird to me, like seeing them like this. Clark Kent and Lois Lane come out. They're like, well, that was nice. Man, Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle come out, and they're going at it like rabbits in heat. It's amazing. But the best part of this is the batting cage, right? When they get to the batting cage, like they're just like smacking baseballs left and right. And then Superman's like, hey man, I mean, I could pitch to you if you want. Like you wouldn't hit it, but I mean, I could pitch to you if you want. And then Batman's like, no, dude, like if you pitched to me, Superman, I would smash that baseball. Like you don't have a chance. Like there's really nothing you could do here. Like I would absolutely smash that thing. Something else I also want you guys to notice too, Superman is dressed as Batman wearing his glasses. I think it's hilarious. I think it's amazing. Batman wearing glasses, Batman wearing specs. Dude, this is like the most fun I've ever had covering a story before. This is amazing. But the other half of this is like we pick up with Lois Lane and Catwoman, right? And this is cool because for the most part, again, like they're foreign entities to each other to a degree. And the biggest question that Lois Lane has is like, why Batman? Like of all the people you could marry, why would you marry Batman? And the answer of Catwoman is so simple and it's so amazing and it's beautifully done. Her response is, it's just because he catches me when I fall. And it's you know, the question is like can you relate to that? And it's so cool because like that's the story of Superman and Lois Lane. And we've said it a million times before. Lois Lane falls, Superman catches her. But it's that he's always there for her and she's always there for him. It is the definition of what it means to be like a tried and true partner, you know, a tried and true love. I mean, that's kind of the nature of life, right? I mean, when people get together and people get in relationships, they're not really waiting on Superman, right? I mean, like a lot of women out there aren't really waiting on Superman to show up and whisk them away from all the dangers of the world and to give them all the money they need so they'll never have to worry about things. I mean, there are some who are, but like by and large, if a woman out there is waiting on Superman, it's because she's Superwoman. She's looking for a partner. She's not looking for a superhero, a white knight to show up and rescue her from all of life's struggles. You know, the idea of a relationship is coming across problems and solving them together. And that's why this works, is because the relationship between Selena Kyle and Batman is juxtaposed right next to the relationship between Lois Lane and Superman. And where we would think they would be starkly different, and where we would think it would all be predicated on two completely diametrically opposing views. Instead, they're the exact same. Everybody's looking for the same thing. Everyone is looking for love. And where Lois Lane and Superman found it, Selena Kyle and Batman have found it. But it's one of those things where like when you cut below the personality of Batman, when you cut below the whole, you know, I'm putting this wall up because I'm Batman and this wall's here because I protect myself from the world. When you cut past all that, and when you cut past, you know, Selena Kyle who does the same thing, they're just two people looking for love and they found it in each other. And that's why this is so beautiful and that's why this is so cool. Now, from here, like it's kind of funny because as they're walking along, this guy dresses the Question runs up and snatches the purse of Lois Lane. And it's hilarious because it's like, the question isn't who's going to let me, the question is who is going to stop me. And it's hilarious. Honestly, if I saw this, like if I were at like the superhero themed comic book I guess like a comic book convention at a theme park, like if I were there and I saw this, I would try to get it. Like I would try to record it and like I would upload it as a front bumper on my channel. I'd be like, guys, you have to see this, you know, and then like I would put it in the video, but like people would love it and it would be amazing. And I would just be like, yes, all those likes, I am feasting on them. But like it'd be hilarious because in response to all this, Superman and Batman are just kind of watching this happen. And then like Superman's like, okay, so like here's how far this guy is, how fast he's traveling. And Batman's like, got it, throws a baseball, knocks the dude right out. And somebody dresses Green Lantern is just kind of like, damn. Also, maybe it's just me. That guy looks like he's dressed as Alan Scott Green Lantern. Oh my God, they're referencing Alan Scott Green Lantern, like the old Alan Scott. Not the new Alan Scott. The new Alan Scott's not as good as the old one. The old Alan Scott. But once the night starts to wind down, like once everything starts to come to a close and it really starts to come to an end, it's really more or less everybody just saying, hey, look, this was amazing. Like this was a great time. You know, I had a blast. Batman's just kind of like, no, I did not have fun, even though I did. I'm just not going to tell you. Like, I mean, that's brooding Batman. But you know, when the whole thing winds down, it's funny because Superman's like, hey man, like I'd still love to like pitch at you sometime, to like throw a baseball and see if you can hit it. You know, I mean, you can't, but like, I mean, we'll see what's up. You know, it's like, I know a place. So they end up at like a baseball pitch, right? And this is the coolest thing ever. We end up at a baseball pitch and like Superman goes to throw the baseball. And Batman's like, dude, I'm gonna hit it. I mean, that's just the way it is, you know? And Superman's like, whatever, man, nobody can hit this baseball. Like, you're not gonna hit this baseball, Batman. And Superman throws the ball and he's like, here's to the impossible. And then the comic ends, we never find out what happens. That's not true. I don't know why I told you that. What ends up happening is Batman smashes it. Why? Because he has prep time. Okay, so we are picking up with actually what I think is one of the coolest stories in DC Rebirth so far with Batman, which is called The Gift. And this actually sees the return of Booster Gold. Now, Booster Gold also did appear in the booster shot with Superman, but we haven't really covered that yet. That actually comes in the aftermath of the Oz effect. So we'll probably cover that sometime in the next couple weeks or so. But when it comes to like this is really, I think this does a better job of kind of hitting home at the nature of Booster Gold, really for like a lot of new fans. And the reason why is because for people who are getting into DC Rebirth or really getting into DC Comics because of DC Rebirth, there's a very good chance that you have no idea who Booster Gold is. Now, he was in like New 52 and you did see him there, but really a lot of fans' mind, at least how they think of Booster Gold, really comes from like before the New 52, right? Like it comes in the post-crisis landscape. And the reason why was because that was when Booster Gold really blew up. I mean, Booster Gold was introduced in 1986, so he's a post-crisis character. But the idea here is that when you had the original Justice League back in Brave and the Bold, and then they got their own solo series, you know, really from like 1960 going forward, when Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, DC canceled the Justice League in its entirety. They got rid of the traditional Justice League team, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, all that kind of good stuff, The Flash, and they relaunched it under Keith Giffen and J.M. DeMatteis as Justice League International. And the reason for this was because by the time Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, the core members of the Justice League were hugely popular. I mean, they didn't really need a Justice League team. It was cool to have, but the concept of the team could be used for other purposes, namely bolstering the popularity of characters who just really couldn't sell their own books because the name Justice League was so huge. And so handing it over to Giffen and Matteis and then having them revamp it as Justice League International meant the name remained the same, but the roster changed. Now, of course, in order to keep wary readers from walking away in its entirety, they threw Batman on as leader of the team, and that was enough to keep people interested. And then once, the roster began to take form and you had like Guy Gardner and you had Booster Gold and you had Blue Beetle, the kind of comedy / serious nature of the stories proved to be hugely popular. Justice League International was massive when it first showed up. People loved it. Now, as time progressed, people began to lose interest. And that's the reason why in 1998, Justice League International was just basically wiped away. All the Justice League teams were removed in their entirety. And then you got JLA by Grant Morrison, Justice League of America. It was the return of the original Justice League team. But nonetheless, when it came to the character of Booster Gold, he was really popular because one, he was a glory hound, and two, like he was basically a crook. He was a guy from the future who would use his knowledge of current events because he was from the future and showed up and then was just like, I know how to save everything. And it was funny for what it was, but it was really more the relationship between Blue Beetle and Ted Kord that helped to make Booster Gold hugely popular. Like that's really what kind of set things off. The sort of like, buddy cop duo that the two of them formed made them wildly popular for a lot of fans. And so really like that aspect of Blue Beetle almost always remained. There were a lot of great stories that dealt with the idea that he felt like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders, but for the most part, it was just kind of like that comedic element. And so he always had that little bit of humor here. So what this story does is it initially does not pick up with Booster Gold. Instead, it picks up with Green Lantern. It picks up with Hal Jordan. And he basically offs himself, which is actually kind of wild because it's like right off the bat, I mean, one, he's kind of grinning and looks pretty sadistic and screwed up. But two, he's just kind of like, look, the rings don't let you take yourself out. But if you overcome the willpower of the ring, like you can do whatever you want to do. And like that falls in line. Like we know that from the Green Lantern mythos. Now, of course, we end up finding out he does this in the face of Booster Gold. But this is kind of crazy because everything is screwed up right now. And it's kind of wild because it's like, what in the world is going on? And so ultimately you end up having Blue Beetle who's just kind of like, okay, look, we got to go find Batman. We got to go find Batman and we have to show him, everything that's going on and what have you. And then of course he's taken out from behind by Batman, but Batman's wearing guns. And so right off the bat, the idea that Batman's strapped with like massive bullets, he's got grenades, he's got, these huge guns. He looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger from Terminator blended with Cable from Marvel Comics, which is actually pretty cool. He looks like the Punisher. Can we all just admit here that if Batman became the Punisher, it would probably be the coolest thing ever? Like that's a story we need to have. But basically it's this idea that it's almost reminiscent of Flashpoint. When you had the Flashpoint event and we got this alternate reality, we had a circumstance where Bruce Wayne died instead of his parents and Thomas Wayne became Batman and Martha Wayne became the Joker. It was an amazing story when it came out. It was maybe it was like a 3 or 4 part story. I think it was 4. But with this thing, it's cool because this version of Batman is just like ruthless and it's very reminiscent of how Thomas Wayne was. Thomas Wayne was cutthroat. cutthroat. He would kill people. He would do whatever he had to do. But while you end up having like Booster Gold and Batman who are facing off against one another, we transition over to Jason Todd. And what we end up finding out here is Jason Todd is not the Red Hood. Instead, what's been going on here is Jason Todd is actually like, he owns a tire company. And this tire company specializes in basically creating tires that shock jokers from stealing people's rims, basically. Now, again, this is cool because this is blending a lot of small things together, right? Like, I mean, if you look at DC, like if you've been reading DC for a while, then like it's taking all these little threads, all these little tidbits and sort of bringing them all together. For example, the concept of the Jokers, that probably comes from Batman Beyond. In Batman Beyond, the Joker had long since been dead, and in his place came like the Joker gang. And so you had like all these people, men and women, who would dress up as Jokers and then go out and commit crimes. Also notice here that it's basically Joker with like a rod in his hand, which is kind of like a throwback basically to like the Death in the Family story arc where Jason Todd originally died in DC Comics. But this is kind of cool because what this indicates here is that of course Jason Todd never became Red Hood, which indicates that Jason Todd was never adopted by Batman. If that wasn't the case, then we don't really know where he ends up coming from. Instead, we just know he kind of becomes a tire mechanic. The other half of this is Booster Gold talking to his machine, Skeets. Now, Skeets is the means by which Booster Gold travels back and forth through time. And we'll actually get a little bit of clarification on that here in a minute, so we won't spoil it for right here and now. But the thing that I want you guys to notice here is really the relationship between the two of them, because this was a hallmark of Booster Gold. The fact that he and his machine would bicker with each other. Booster Gold was always a character who seemed kind of childish. And when taken out of context, and really when sort of just thrown out there by himself, it can be hit and miss. In a lot of ways, he can be like Deadpool. I think the success of Booster Gold really comes into play when someone takes his character and they throw it into a comic where he has someone to bounce off of. And that's why Booster Gold always works so well, because in a lot of ways, the relationship between like Booster Gold and Blue Beetle, or like Booster Gold and Batman, or even Superman is very much akin to like Cable and Deadpool. They just kind of bounce off each other. It's serious combined with like humor. Now, Booster Gold's taken by Batman, kind of whisked away. And it's kind of like hung from a balcony. And that's when you end up finding out this Batman is actually Dick Grayson. Now, again, this is one of the things that I love about stories like this, is because we're not going to find out how Dick Grayson became Batman. And that's why things like this are so cool. Why the miniseries of like White Knight and things like Nightwing's New Order. The reason why those little things and tidbits like this are so cool is because they keep us wanting more. And that's actually a genius move. To kind of sidetrack here for a second, one of the big issues that Marvel's been struggling with for the last while is they've really kind of reverted back to where DC used to be maybe 50 or 60 years ago, in the sense that they're like very, very linear stories. And Marvel was like that when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were writing stories, but they're very linear stories. It's just kind of like, you know, here's an event that sets off the story, and then here's a story happening, and then the story ends. Done. And like, that's it. It doesn't really give you any reason to want anything more than what you already see. But with stories like this, the reason why these are a great reprieve is because you're just kind of like, well, then how in the hell did Dick Grayson become Batman? Where's Bruce Wayne? Like, what's going on with Bruce Wayne's character? Like, those are the kind of things that you want to know. And they keep us coming back and they keep us wanting more. And then we end up tweeting the hell out of the writer, give us the answer to this question. Give us a one shot, man, like do something. That's where we kind of get a real cool interest with those things. Now, again, the other thing to bear in mind here is that when Booster Gold makes his escape, one thing to remember is that while he is a glory hog, and while he is somewhat nonsensical, he is not incapable. Booster Gold is very much a capable superhero in a wide variety of different ways. What we also end up doing here, and this is really more of an aside than anything else, we actually pick up with Duke Thomas. And this is kind of interesting here. I think this was really done just for the purpose of showing where Duke is and what Duke's doing, but he hasn't really had that many significant roles in DC Comics that there's a reason for fans to care about what's going on with him here. But again, it is kind of a cool thing to see. I mean, at this point, Duke Thomas has basically had his head cut open, he's been lobotomized, and someone's just kind of spoon feeding him, and that's it. But the fact remains here, what we end up doing is switching over to Bruce Wayne. And that's when we find out in this line, in this current set of circumstances, Bruce Wayne never became Batman. And the reason why Bruce Wayne never became Batman is because Bruce Wayne's parents never died. Thomas and Martha Wayne are still very much alive. And Booster Gold shows up and he's like, hey man, like I got a present for you. What I did is I went back in time and I saved your parents from dying. And so like your parents are alive now because of what I've done. But I did that because you're getting married and I wanted you to see what happiness would be like. So like now we have to go back and we have to like let your parents die. It's kind of screwed up. It's kind of messed up. Like, hey man, this life you're living is a lie, but this is the gift that I gave you. And now I'm going to take this gift and take it away. It's like giving a person $1 million and just saying, I wanted you to see what it was like to hold $1 million. Thanks. And then just take the $1 million and leave. But like, that's Booster Gold. Now, the funny thing about this is the response of Bruce Wayne is like, I've always known that that was the case. I've always had this itch under my skin. There's always just like this phrase on the edge of my tongue. I knew that something wasn't right here. It was an itch that I couldn't scratch. Things are not the way they're supposed to be. And so the result is that he's like, okay, I mean, I guess things could go back to normal, but I don't want them to. So he destroys Skeets, traps Booster Gold in the modern day and leaves him there, and then just leaves and goes back to his life. And we pick up a year later, and then we end up having Booster Gold, who breaks into Arkham Asylum to free Catwoman. And so picking up with Thomas and Bruce, it's kind of cool here, but we also end up finding out some somewhat seedy things are going on. Of course, Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin, basically is president of the United States, but still, like, Thomas has done some seedy things. And that's the interesting thing about this, is when you go through and you look at the various iterations of Thomas Wayne in DC Comics, and even when you go back and you look at like the origin of Batman, the indication is that Thomas Wayne was always a good guy. Now, a lot of that was because we didn't get a whole lot about him, and it's only really in like expanded flashbacks, which is to say flashbacks that give you more information about his dad, that there seems to be the possibility that maybe he did some seedy things, that maybe he wasn't really as legit as we thought he was. But still, like in this, he's been working to try to make Gotham a better place, but there's just kind of something off about him. But in the midst of all this, because of the fact that everything's crashing down, because villains are going awry, because everything's going crazy here, what we end up having is, one, he suffers a heart attack, and two, the revelation is that like Oswald Cobblepot is going to bring in the forces of Ra's al Ghul, who have basically conquered Europe and Asia, combine them into a single continent, and then use those forces to essentially quell any kind of rebel threat that exists inside the United States. But the hidden letters here, the hidden wording, the invisible ink really kind of says that like Ra's al Ghul, like once he gets in, he will not leave. And so he'll get his forces in here, and then he could potentially conquer the United States. Not only that, of course, picking up with Booster Gold, he's really kind of rambling on to Selina Kyle, but we start learning some things that are going on behind the scenes, that when Booster Gold traveled back in time and stopped the parents of Bruce Wayne from dying, that of course that meant Bruce Wayne never became Batman. And because Bruce Wayne never became Batman, Bruce Wayne never joined the Justice League. And because Bruce Wayne never joined the Justice League, that meant that there was no one there to save the Justice League when they first faced off against Starro. And when that happened, Starro killed the Justice League. They're all dead. And so it's kind of crazy. I mean, you end up having like, Green Lantern, of course, who was alive, but like the indication seems to be here, Wonder Woman, presumably Martian Manhunter, the Flash, they're all dead. But again, this is one of those things where it's just like, well, I mean, like, I want to see him, I want to see this climactic battle, and I want to see how it happened. I want to see how they died. Like, those are the kind of things that are kind of interesting, because I'll be honest with you guys, if there's a story where like the Justice League dies, or like a superhero team that I really love, if there's like this dystopian future where everything goes bad and they die, like, I want to see how it happens. Like, I want to see, I want to see that take place. But Booster Gold's idea is, okay, we have to take you, Catwoman, we have to get you to Bruce Wayne, because Bruce Wayne's going to marry you. And if we get you to him, then everything will be fixed and everything will be fine, and the two of you will get married. And so his line of logic is, I'll take you to Bruce Wayne and everything will be sorted out. And so of course, picking up with Bruce and Martha, this is actually one of those instances when you see a harder side of Martha that you never really see. Martha was always kind of given to us as like this tender person. Of course, it's kind of funny because she puts on this hard edge. The doctor comes out and says, if you'll come with me. And she's like, well, what about my husband? He's like, well, I need you to follow me. And her immediate response is, we are Waynes of Gotham City. We do not follow anybody. You tell me what I want to know, not now, but right now. And it's cool because it's just like, bam, Martha Wayne, just boom, just like that. And I like that. I like seeing that hard, gritty edge of Martha Wayne because it's like a side you never really see. And it's kind of a way to say, look, like the Waynes are still very powerful in the city of Gotham. They're still like probably the #1 family in Gotham City. They're a very big name. And so again, we end up finding out that Thomas survived the experience. He's not dead. But then from there, you basically end up picking up with like Booster and Catwoman traveling to the house of really to like Wayne Manor to pick up with Thomas and Martha and Bruce. The problem with this is that Booster Gold is only ever paying half attention to what's going on. And he doesn't realize the reason why Catwoman was in Arkham Asylum isn't because she's just like an incorrigible robber or anything like that. It's because she's an insane serial killer. And so as soon as she gets into Wayne Manor, she starts killing everybody. Alfred's the first one to fall, which is always the case. Guys, writers, can we please stop killing Alfred? I love Alfred. All right, please stop killing my main man, Alfred. Catwoman goes through there and she literally just starts tearing people up and just starts like taking everybody out. Now, of course, Batman's followed them there. And what this does is it turns into like a bloodbath. I mean, this is a massacre. Batman goes after Booster Gold and Catwoman. Catwoman goes after Bruce Wayne and Thomas and Martha Wayne, and she kills them all. Like Catwoman kills Alfred, she kills Thomas, she kills Martha, she kills Batman, she kills them all except for Booster Gold. But then you end up having Bruce Wayne who gets the shot off on Catwoman, and so Booster Gold's unconscious and everyone else is dead. And it's just like, Jesus, like this is insane. Tom King knows how to write crazy stuff. But it's cool though, because from there you basically pick up with this idea that Batman, or I guess Bruce Wayne, is now completely and totally resolved. And what he's actually doing is taking shots at Batman and taking shots at Catwoman by various statues that he's created and honing his skills. But this is really Tom King's way, or it seems seems to be Tom King's way of saying that like Bruce Wayne does not have the various skills with weapons use and things like that we would expect. He's literally like learning how to shoot here. And it works for what it is. And the reason why is because it fits in perfectly with the way the story is being told. That with Bruce Wayne having never lost his parents, he never had a reason to become Batman, which meant he never had a reason to learn all that kind of stuff. And so because he never had a reason, he's basically learning those things now. And so he's not as capable as we would expect him to be. But he's also got Booster Gold just kind of chained up inside this giant cave. And that's really about it. He's just kind of keeping him there. And so what he ends up doing is having guys basically clean up Booster Gold. They fix Skeets, and the response is, you're going to take us back in time. And you're going to take us back to the point where my parents died, and we're going to fix it. Now, here's the funny thing about this is the time machine of Booster Gold is not an absolute thing. You just kind of have to say like, send us back to like about this general point in time. Like send us back to this point where I did a thing. Like that's how his time machine works. And so where Bruce Wayne kind of offers out, or at least that's how Booster Gold puts off the perception that this time machine works. And so where Batman's, where Bruce Wayne's kind of like, okay, look, fine, then like take us back 10 minutes before my parents died. Then you in turn have Booster Gold. He's like, okay, we can do that. Now this is one of the funnier moments in the comics, because then like as that happens, he just kind of like, he's like, Skeets, do that. Send us 10 minutes before Bruce Wayne's parents died, and then winks. And so like you get this hilarious exchange because he's just like, Bruce Wayne's like, what, did you just wink? Why did you wink? And then just kind of like this going back and forth. They're like, well, what do you mean? Like, I mean, I didn't wink. It's like, yes, you did. It's like, well, I mean, I winked, but there was a fly in my eyes. Like there was no fly there. Like it's funny to see this going back and forth. This is a moment when I say that Booster Gold works really well, when he has someone to bounce off of like this. From there, like you end up having them basically jump back 10 minutes before, and then we end up finding out it's not 10 minutes before the massacre in Wayne Manor. It's 10 minutes before Booster Gold basically saved the parents of Bruce Wayne when he was a kid. And that's kind of the tragic thing here, is because Booster Gold kind of has to make this choice, right? I mean, he's kind of like, look, basically, I just have to bide time. He's got to kill 10 minutes, but he's not telling Bruce that. Bruce has no idea where they are right now. All he knows is that they're on a rooftop somewhere. He doesn't know exactly. I mean, he could kind of look around the skyline and get a pretty good idea of where they're located at. But like with this time passing, suddenly you have Booster Gold when he originally showed up here. And so you got two boosters fighting at the same time. And so of course he shows up. The intention is to basically save the parents of Bruce Wayne. But instead, Bruce responds exactly as you would expect. He takes out that version of Booster Gold. And so from there, it's like, okay, now we basically have to like let these events unfold. You end up having like the original Booster Gold facing off against Bruce Wayne alongside Booster Gold as he exists now. And all the while where this fight's taking place, you have Thomas and Martha who hear the gunshots of like Bruce Wayne when he's facing off against these two boosters. And the response is, well, things are kind of weird. So like, let's go this way instead. And they run into Joe Chill. Joe Chill, that whole circumstance unfolds exactly as we would expect it to. Thomas and Martha Wayne are dead. And this is kind of crazy because it's basically Tom King's way of saying like Bruce Wayne kind of engineered the death of his own parents. Bruce Wayne basically just kind of has to look down and realize that his parents are dead, that like there's no way to escape this. And so ultimately Bruce Wayne turns a gun on himself, and that's the end of that. And so in turn, like Booster Gold basically fixed things. And so of course Booster Gold jumps back, everything sets back to the way it was supposed to be. And then of course Booster Gold reveals everything to Bruce and says, hey, look, here's what I did and here's how I screwed up, and so on and so forth. But it's kind of cool here because this is designed to do two things: one you expect and one you don't expect. The one you expect is, it basically just kind of shows Booster Gold, despite his best intentions, usually ends up screwing things up. Booster Gold tries to do the right thing and ends up doing all the wrong things instead. But to me, and I don't know if this was Tom King's intention, but to me, this clarifies the events of Flashpoint and what Dr. Manhattan did. At the outset, people will look at this and they will say, okay, how can Booster Gold travel back in time and allow Bruce Wayne's parents to survive, and then travel back in time again and allow them to die, and things go right back to the way they were before? Like Flashpoint showed us, if you go into the past and you screw things up, like you'll change the future. But when you go into the past and you try to fix them, the future will still be different originally, like from the way it was supposed to go, because the very fact that you traveled into the past changed how the future is going to turn out. Like you've altered the course of the future, so you can never make it exactly the way it was supposed to be. You've altered the direction things are going to go. All right, here's why I think this works. If you look at Flashpoint for the way it was originally written, that logic is sound. The way that you think about that is 100% correct. It is absolutely accurate. But what DC Rebirth has said is that when Barry Allen went into the past and saved his mom's life, and then initiated the Flashpoint universe, and then went back in time after realizing that his mom has to die, things were supposed to go back to normal. Nothing was supposed to change, but Dr. Manhattan changed it. And so this fits in perfectly with that, because what it basically says is like, that can happen. Someone can go into the past, they can change things, realize that what they changed was wrong, go back to the past again, set them back to rights, and everything will be okay. Everything will be fine. It's the fact that Dr. Manhattan changed things due to Flashpoint, that's what really throws a wrench in the works. That's why everything seems so different now than the way it was originally supposed to be before New 52 happened, before the events of Flashpoint took place. So I wanted to throw that out there because to me it works. I think it works really, really well. I think it actually fits in perfectly. I think probably one of the reasons why Tom King may have done it like this is so that in future stories, when the whole whole DC thing gets lined out. We get that huge explanation from Dr. Manhattan about what he did, why he did it, and so on and so forth. And even if things don't go back to normal, this will fit in very nicely with that. It'll fit in nice and snug with everything that's been done so far, and it won't really stand out, and it won't really, be out of place. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.